took them down, and then the tree said, "Screw you," and all over again. So yeah, I mean, it was a lot.
Heavy, very
Yeah.
heavy.
Yes, please.
Is that an indicator of like?
I don't know. I don't know. I
Like
hope
we're gonna
not.
have like a really rough winter. Like
Winter,
the
yeah.
trees telling us,
Yeah.
hey,
Yeah.
we're getting ready.
We're getting ready.
It might
Everything
be.
seems
I-
weird, like none of the maples have really turned,
Well,
like in my yard.
It
All the
just-
oaks started to go brown, and then the maples.
Oh,
I was
Usually
getting,
red already,
see, because
yeah.
I have it on
the
here
oaks
right
are all
now.
green. It's all green. Everything's green around.
My computer won't stay awake.
I mean, I'm even looking out there. It's
Yeah,
pretty green.
here we are.
Okay.
So this becomes a great timing now when the brush stump closes. You got to get everything into them by. So
I just go in the woods.
That's why I got a place I can haul it.
I've got my phone, I'm using my phone as a hotspot.
Oh, yeah, see?
You're not mad at me for giving it a door. Your truck is so clean and I wanted
Oh,
to
it is
tease
not-
you about digging my door. I didn't, it looks great.
you're down here. They decide to separate us.
I know why.
Oh, bad
I'm
behavior.
in trouble.
Bad behavior. Yes, right.
Hey, how are you? Nice to meet you.
You too. I don't.
I'm
see
Judy
your name.
Nemitz.
You're Judy.
Yes.
I'm Renee.
Nice to meet
Nice
you.
to meet you too. She said it was a good time, though. Do we have the?
Yeah, Vegas.
I believe it's
It's
on.
only $2.5. Yeah, it's the best place to fly.
Joanne's saying yes.
Oh, okay, great.
I don't really want to fly in there, but it's the.
Okay, good evening, everybody. It is 6:30 on October 19th. This is a special meeting for both the Planning Commission and the Township Board. It's a joint meeting, so that's always a nice opportunity to get together. You have the agenda before us, so we'll call the meeting to order, and, I think we'll just pop in here the pledge. So we'll start things off with the pledge, if you'll join me. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, so we'll do roll call for one board and then the next board. Is that okay, Leslie? All right, go for it.
Walters.
Present.
Cook.
Here.
Lyon.
Here.
Cortain.
Here.
Bartlett.
Here.
Sue Cortain. Here. Friend.
Here.
Edley. Here. Well, we don't want Walters again. Ferguson.
Here.
Gonzalez.
Here.
Nemitz.
Here.
Leonard. Syke.
Here.
Okay, very good, thank you. And we want to welcome Renee Edley. This is her initial meeting on the Planning Commission. She's familiar with us, though, at the Township, on the zoning board, or was on the Zoning Board of Appeals, and is continuing with the Board of Review. So thank you for joining us and for being on the board. So with that, we will take a look at the agenda that's in front of us, and then we'll look at the conflict of interest, if that's okay. So we have the master plan update, and Claire will lead us through that discussion, and we'll look at the action plan and a future land use map, and then we'll move into the conversation of short-term rentals, and there's a memo and an attorney letter as well in your packet. So with that, from either board, does anybody have a conflict of interest with anything? Okay, seeing no declared conflicts. Is there anything from the agenda that anyone would like removed or added? I don't think we have all board members here of the Planning Commission, but we do of the Township Board. But at any rate, anything, any adjustments to the agenda? Okay, so we'll just move forward on consensus with that. And John, you want to take it with the minutes?
Sure, we have, for the Planning Commission, there's the couple sets of minutes. We have the regular meeting from October 5th of the Planning Commission, and then there's also, we had 2 site plan review visits, but actually only one did we actually have a quorum, and that was for the one at the Corwin accessory building on 5 Mile, also on October 5th at 2021. So if the Planning Commission wants to review, if you have any comments or changes.
For the minutes?
Yes.
I have a question on page 4, at the top, it said, dealing with the site plan. At the end, it says, "The board discussion ensued, culminating in a motion by Nimitz to approve site plan." I thought that was Dan and seconded by Judy.
I can look on the video.
But
Yeah,
the-
that's correct. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
that's the only, and the last page, page 7, that was, it says at the top, "Commissioner asked the cabin course be researched." That was also Judy.
Okay.
The last page, page 7 of our packet, 7 of 41.
I know I'm confusing with someone else.
I don't know.
It's just, we have an unidentified commissioner, but it was Judy.
I have a mask on, that's why. I'll wear a name tag next time for you, Les.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. That's all.
Okay. Anybody else have any comments, changes? Okay. Entertain a motion for those minutes.
Also move to approve the minutes of October 5th, 2021, and the site plan review minutes with the corrections that Commissioner Gonzalez stated.
Second.
I'll second it.
We got a motion to approve the minutes with the changes for October 5th, and that includes also the site visit. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So all those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, motion carries on the minutes.
Okay, great, thank you. All right, with that, we will move on to public comment. We have the opportunity for public comment. Claire, if you want to share the microphone over there. So with this public comment, you're welcome to stand up to the podium, introduce yourself, your name and your address, and make your comment to not only the Township Board, also the Planning Commission. And we do try to keep it at about 3 minutes. We don't drag you off with a hook or anything like that, but at 3 minutes, we try to ask you to wrap that up. All right, well, thank you.
My name is Michael Iruli. I live in the Pine Grove neighborhood, 928 Tamarack, and I've lived there for over 20 years. I am in full support of any and all limits placed on short-term rentals. My neighborhood has changed dramatically in the past few years with the proliferation of short-term rentals. There are currently more than 4 short-term rentals within 1,000 feet of my home. I am eager to see a density limit that also limits the distance between short-term rentals. On a personal note, living next door to a short-term rental has been a big change from living next door to an owner-occupied house, and before that, for the last 15 years, as long-term renters in that home. During the past 7 months, I've had to call the sheriff 4 separate times to report loud parties occurring next door at midnight and more frequently at 2 a.m. 3 of those times, the sheriff had to return the same evening, twice, incidents. Is this a good use of our emergency responders? I have never in the previous 21 years I've lived in that home had to call the sheriff for a noise complaint. I do not feel comfortable with drunk strangers at 2 a.m. and confronting them. Each time I have followed the protocol as listed by the township ordinance. I have called the property manager at the number provided. Only once was my call answered. I have never received any follow-up from the property manager or owner. I have called the hotline number as listed in East Bay Township. Each time, and for the first time last week, I had a return call from the compliance officer. I greatly appreciate this call. I was told that the township short-term hotline is not monitored at all by the township, and nothing is done with this information. This must change. I'm concerned with the lack of long-term rentals and the workplace housing in the area. We all know someone who is looking to buy or rent a home in the area that is limited by the escalating prices and availability. Our neighborhood has always had a portion of long-term rentals. Again, using the house next door as an example, this has been a long-term rental for most of the 20 years I have lived there. These renters sent their kids to local schools, were employed at local businesses, and shopped at local businesses. They knew their neighbors and were invested in the neighborhood. This does not happen with short-term renters. I see a cap on short-term rentals as a step towards balancing the long-term housing supply. I would like to see more promotion of owner-occupied housing. Using an example, the short-term rental next door to us, it was purchased specifically for the use as a short-term rental by the company up north and away. This company owns 2 other homes in our neighborhood and advertises 6 homes in the area. None of these homes are owner-occupied. These are not my neighbors who are taking advantage of their personal property rights and renting out a portion of their home. These are commercial ventures and should be treated as such. As a commercial venture, they have no place in a neighborhood zoned residential. I look often at the real estate listings for our neighborhood. I notice how that instead of listing saying family-friendly neighborhood, it now says short-term rental-friendly township. Any questions?
Thank you. Don't take non-responses, not interested.
Thank you very much for the time to speak.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Any other public comment at this time? And so when she's done, you can just be ready to make your way up after her. Thank you and welcome.
Tricia Hersberger, 4170 Celery Bay Drive. First off, I would like to thank the commissioners for taking on the arduous task of writing the update of the master plan, and in that, the short-term rentals. We appreciate the fact that this is a time-consuming, research-intensive study, but in reading through this draft, it is obvious that the riparian's thoughts and concerns were taken into consideration. But I would like to speak, however, to the section under natural resources. All of the actions listed are of great need and importance to maintaining a healthy ecosystem in our lakes area. The easiest way to maintain our healthy natural resources, I feel, is the section dealing with communication. It was judged a 3 out of 3, 3 being of least priority under actions. However, communication can often stop issues before they happen. Issues that can be such as working with these new and current ordinances, expectations and restrictions on plans for area development by private or even larger companies, landscapers, realtors, new or current property owners, lake associations, etc. If these ordinances are distributed to all of the above, say on a 6-month to 12-month time period, and a copy provided with all applications for permits of all kinds, there would be no questions as to the applicant's knowledge of regulations to their project, often stated as, "I didn't know." This will not be a consideration for the builders to rely upon. Private homeowners also come under this category. Providing ordinance information to applicants when they come to the township office is one way to keep people current with the regulations. But what about the others? Small focus group meetings with riparians from the lakes area, our farming community, homeowners, and businesses would help ease the frustrations of understanding what is allowed in their communities. The attendees to these meetings could then disseminate the information they learned to people in their immediate community by producing a quick little reference guide, holding meetings of their own, and the list goes on. But what is important is that people are aware of their role in keeping our East Bay Township as close as we can to when we found this beautiful area and chose to make it our home. Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead. And if you would just introduce yourself, and anyone else who'd like to come up for public comment too, if you'd just like to maybe move up to a chair closer or be ready to take her place when she's done, that'd be great.
I would sound a lot like Mike, he's my neighbor. My name's Peggy Valentine. I've lived at 924 Tamarack for 42 years, and in that time I can count on one hand the number of noise disturbances, and nothing that you'd have to call anybody about. And several months ago it started, the house 2 doors down, had an extremely loud party, and on the letter that we get with your letterhead, but letting them know that they're going to be in our area. You're supposed to call them, and then the hotline, and then who was it? The East Bay Community Police Officers, and the GT County, or Central Dispatch. Never had an answer. And the hotline, you get somebody who talks to you. Take all your information, and found out that East Bay doesn't even listen to any of it. That's why it only says you've had 33 complaints, because I know a lot of people that have called that number. And I still haven't received a letter from 808 Indian Trail, which is directly across the alley from me.
Is that the rental?
You can tell they're working on, I was told it was going to be an Airbnb, and they're working on the upstairs of the garage to make it an apartment behind there. And I also have 2 doors down, across the alley, and directly behind me on the alley is, I believe it's 919 Avenue E. That was fully remodeled and everything for an Airbnb. And according to the ordinance, any guests and everything have to park on the property. And what I read in yours, I didn't hear it because my room's on the far side of where it was. My windows were closed, but I guess there was a big party. And the neighbor that crossed the alley said they were parked up and down the alley and on my yard. Yeah, Pine Grove, yeah, it's always supposed to be a quiet neighborhood, that's why we moved here 40-some years ago, but it's not. It's ruining property values. My neighbor, one street over, said they've done a lot of repairs, remodels, everything, and somebody bought the home next door for an Airbnb. And she said the woman was not nice at all, basically told her to get off her yard. But I'm curious to know how many of you live in the Pine Grove area.
So I appreciate your comments, but we listen to you. It's not a period where we do go back and forth discussion.
Okay. But I know I have around at least 4 of them, as Mike said, within a block of my house. Okay.
Thank you very much. Next person for public comment? Oh, ma'am, you've already spoken, so we'll just, oh, you forgot something. Okay. I was just going to say, we'll let everyone get a chance to speak first. You know, if you can't decide, we make you thumb wrestle, so.
No problem. Thank you for allowing us to vocalize our opinions and our ideas. My name is William Gotlin. I live at 3655 Wepper Road, and we're on Spider Lake. If I stand on my dock, I can watch 4 or 5 short-term rentals. I have absolutely nothing against anybody making money, but not on the backs of the people who live there. That's what's wrong. That's the crux of the problem that we're experiencing. When my wife and I bought this many, many years ago, one of the things that we sought was the solitude, the peace and quiet, listening to the loons in the evening. How wonderful that was. Now what we have is the last was 3:21 in the morning with people who have forgot what it's like to watch their drinking habits. They're far too loud. The language used was embarrassing. We have grandkids that come up and want to utilize the space and enjoy the peace and quiet as well. The language was terrible. And the problem is, I have stopped young guys who have apparently at one of the rentals, it was maybe a bachelor party, hitting golf balls into the lake, aiming at our pontoon boats to see who could hit closest to the pontoon boats. I have watched people throw debris. Our bay is no wake 24/7. I have had to let people know that it's no wake 24/7. I have actually taken it upon myself to stop some of the renters who have very little knowledge about boating and safety, and have their young daughters on the front of their pontoon while they're moving in a forward direction, and if something happened, that one of those young girls would have fallen off, I know they would have been into the motor before they could have ever reacted. The sad part is, this is what we're dealing with constantly. Now, I'm not going to stand here and tell you that, do we have people who are residents on the lake who are abusive to the lake and the safety and the quality? Absolutely we do. But for the most part, because they have a vested interest, the renters have absolutely no vested interest. They come up there for a long weekend, or they come up for a week, and it is, let's drink and have fun. And the things that we have witnessed time and time again is not only embarrassing, but it's a disgrace that adults would act and conduct themselves the way they do. They're on vacation and they throw all their cares away, and the abuse they follow or they practice on our lake, we have to live there. When every spring I'm pulling up golf balls that eventually wash up on our shore. This is sad. And we have so many people who don't know and don't care about what taking care of a lake is about. We do. We have the vested interest. They don't. And I think we need to do something to help curtail the current activities. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else for public comment? You know what, we'll just give those to Leslie and she can pass them around.
They're all the same.
Perfect. Thank you,
A
Carol.
little quicker.
Sure, go ahead.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Carol Kusel, and I'm a year-round township resident. If you'll give me a few extra moments here to give you a little history that pertains to this evening, one of the topics for this evening, I'd really appreciate it. I first visited this township in the 80s when my husband and I rented a cabin on Spider Lake for a summer week. At that time, we had to call the Traverse City Chamber of Commerce and request a list of cabin rentals in the area and wait for the mail delivery to receive an approximately 10-page document printed front and back, likely printed on a mimeograph machine. There was a short paragraph for each rental property and a contact name and number. Reserving a rental week involved calling the property owner, talking with them personally. Once it was set, and we came up for our vacation week, we picked up the cabin key in a downtown store. Subsequently, we rented cabins on several lakes in northwest Michigan, and then for many years rented Spider Lake cabins, either one cabin in a cabin court or a single cabin property. We found we didn't want to leave at the end of the vacation, so we purchased a circa 1950s hunting cabin and eventually rented it as a short-term rental for a few weeks each summer. The income never paid the taxes, the property taxes, but it helped. A few short years ago, we changed our seasonal cabin into a year-round home. During that change process, we rented a lake property from fall through spring. We had to scramble to find summer lodging, as that property is used as a short-term rental in the summer. The owners could make far lot more per week in the summer rental season than they could for a whole month in the off-season. Now, as a full-time resident, I volunteer for the Lake Association Board. It's with those experiences and perspectives that I speak today. And I know I'm not alone in those experiences. I have many friends, not only on Spider Lake, but other lakes in the Forest Lakes region that have come here as visitors and are now permanent residences. I also know that they share some of the perspectives that I will share with you. Want to thank Claire and everyone else involved in the extensive research on the short-term rentals that's already been done. But I'd like to suggest a few other ways or a few other things for your consideration when reviewing ordinances regarding rental properties. The map that you received in your meeting agenda shows the location of 126 licensed short-term rentals in the township. But if you look more closely, you'll notice a few areas where the short-term rentals are clustered. I have a feeling some of the other people that spoke this evening are in those clustered areas. Now, please refer to the handout that I provided, and thanks to fellow riparian Kurt Bedbury for helping me enlarge the map that was in your, portion of the map that was in your agenda packet that shows primarily Spider Lake. Take a look at that and notice that there's 46 short-term rentals that are marked with the green circles around Spider Lake. That's 46 short-term rentals, licensed short-term rentals, licensed, out of the 126 that your agenda packet says are licensed in East Bay Township. That's a solid 1/4 of all the short-term rentals, licensed short-term rentals in East Bay Township. Now, take a closer look, it didn't show up very well, and notice that there's 9 red X's around the map. Those are cabin courts or other similar facilities also on Spider Lake, or at least what was formerly called cabin courts. Refer to the back side of your map and notice that of those 9, 3 are clustered on North Spider Lake Road, 3 are clustered on Lakeview Trail, and the other 3 are distributed in other portions of the lake. If you look at the chart and look at those 9 cabin court type facilities, you'll see that they have more than one facility, more than one cabin, lodging, whatever you want to call it, building. And if you break that down into how many there are, you actually end up with an additional 40 rental buildings on Spider Lake, in addition to those 46 licensed short-term rentals on Spider Lake. That's 86 rental units on Spider Lake. Now, if you look at the people capacity in those rentals, that's another one of the columns on the back of your page there. And take Spider Lake Retreat, for example. That's one big building that supposedly is only rented out as a whole to groups. And it has so many rooms, forgot what the number is, and each room has 4 people, so multiply that and we got the number of people that might be able to stay at capacity there. And then just averaging that most cabins would take about 6 people, then multiply that times the cabins in each of those cabin court facilities. And you end up, in the long run, with 302 people, renters on the lake for just the cabin facilities or cabin court facilities. Add that to the ones from the short-term rentals, and each day there's the possibility of having 578 extra people on the lake. Probably doesn't happen, but it's a possibility, and we notice the difference. That number certainly doesn't seem, or both of those numbers, total number of rental units and the number of possible extra people, certainly doesn't seem to reflect a definition of low-density residential area. So, together, these varieties of rental units, whether they're called condos, apartments, cabin courts, whatever, they and their accompanying transient guests, they have both positive and negative effects. Sure, the income of the family-owned cottages helps the family maintain ownership, and I think all of us can agree that we want that. Sure, the vacationers at those rental properties spend their money in our community, and that helps our local businesses. I'm sure we all agree we want that. But their money doesn't go to supporting the health of the lake or the safety on the water. In a lake community where our backyard essentially is our shared lake with a little bit of shoreland, That increase in people adds to the noise, and then that sound is amplified on the lake. It brings more boats and water toys to the lake, and that increases the risk of bringing in aquatic invasive species. It also, as another speaker explained, decreases the safety on the lake with the additional boats.
Carol, I just want to be fair to everyone. It was a public comment. If you just want to kind of culminate to your point, that would be fantastic.
I could go on with other examples, thank you, I
Yeah.
won't. I appreciate what everyone else has said. Do you know that next year, in 2022, it'll mark 100 years for the first time a cabin was built on Spider Lake? Well, a lot has changed since then, including these rental properties. And I urge you, however, the immense growth in the rental industry, I'm sorry,
And I don't mean to throw you off. I just want to be fair to everybody.
I appreciate that, and things I urge you to consider. Consider limiting the number of rental properties and the concentration of those. Consider a number cap and include what were formerly known as cabin courts or apartments or condos or retreats also in that count. Consider a definitive term and definition for all these different forms of rentals in the ordinance, and as well, seek additional input on the numbers and types of disruptions from the occupants of the short-term rentals. And in that seeking, you can contact the Marine Sheriff and County Sheriff. There's been many, many calls to the Marine Sheriff, and many of those contacts have been from groups in the rental facilities, especially in the larger facilities, and especially over the holiday periods. At Spider Lake, the board has talked on many occasions with the Marine Sheriff. The Marine Sheriff says that Spider Lake is number 2 in Grand Traverse for boat contacts, and that's behind Grand Traverse Bay on the 4th of July for the Cherry Festival week. And like another resident said, you can't blame this, and we don't blame these things all on renters, but we do know that there is a portion of that is counted in that. So I encourage you to continue to listen to your lake associations, continue to encourage your lake associations to give you input. And once again, I thank you on your extensive work on looking at the short-term rental situation and the ordinance. It really is impacting our communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. And if there's any details you want to follow up with the board or the planning commission, feel free to email and get that information to us too. Any other public comment? Hello, how are you?
Good evening. My name is Ralph Bednars. I reside at 1380 Autumn Trail on Rainy Lake. I want to thank all the trustees and commissioners for listening to my comments tonight and during previous East Bay Charter Township Board and Commission meetings about the importance of protecting the unique lakes of the Forest Lakes District. Being a lakefront property owner on Rainy Lake and a retired limnologist from the state of Michigan DNR and DEQ, I have a unique perspective on lake ecology and the importance of protective lakes management in the Forest Lakes District. Tonight I want to comment about the 2021 Master Plan update, specifically the draft vision, policy, and action statements. I made similar comments to the Planning Commission during their meeting on this subject, but I felt it important to address the trustees tonight. The vision must not be obscured by diminishing a top priority of the community, protecting the lakes, streams, and natural areas within the township. Third sentence of the Our Vision statement in your packet now reads, "Inland lakes, the East Bay shoreline, streams and tributaries, and sensitive wetlands will be protected and enhanced through sustainable development practices and natural features preservation." An earlier draft used the phrase "creative development tools." I question the meaning of creative development tools as well as sustainable development practices. What are these tools and practices? I suggest that you replace these vague phrases with the term low-impact development, or LID practices. LID practices are defined and understood. In the draft Natural Resources Policy Statement, Actions Bullet 4 states, update and amend the Forest Lakes Overlay District Ordinance to make it more user-friendly and enhance desired protections in the 50-foot setback area. I support cleaning up the vague language and strengthening the protections in the ordinance, but I question the meaning of make it more user-friendly. Does this mean softening the protections? I urge you to stay away from the vague language in these documents. Thank you for appreciating my comments tonight. Thank you for your service to East Bay Township.
Thank you. Anyone else for public comment? Please go ahead and make your way to the podium. How are you? Let me have you go ahead and move that mic down just a little bit. There you go.
My name is Judy Pelto, and I live on Abbey Lane in East Bay Township. And I just want to reiterate some of what Ralph just mentioned, and that is I also find that the language is quite ambiguous, and I question some of this, the predictability of enforcing of existing ordinances. I mean, are we going to think about eliminating ordinances based on how predictable enforcing them are? Or it's very unclear to me what that sentence means, and I think that the wording does need to be tightened up, and also on the ordinance for clarifying standards, definitions, and enhanced desired protection in the 50-foot setback area. That's fine, but updating the standards of the ordinance, I'm sorry, I lost my place. Basically, and it shouldn't just be the Forest Lakes areas. I think that it's been said at previous planning commission meetings that the Forest Lakes overlay is a very strong overlay. It's looked at as a model for other communities, and I think that that should be applied more generally to most lakes in the East Bay Township. And I think that I'm not clear about how, the lake associations can enforce some of this, because obviously when they need to enforce like boat safety or the short-term rentals, there's not a lot of feedback or help in doing that. And I think that there has to be some way to have ordinances that when you purchase property and the township is aware of that, maybe it's not mailings, maybe it's in some of the zoning or some of the ordinances, because by the time, if you're on a lake, and I've been on lakes in other areas, by the time you know there's a violation, it's already over. I mean, it's like very difficult then to have anything done about that violation, if it's a setback or if it's a building or if it's a shoreline, because by the time you're aware of it, it's too late in most cases. So, and I'm very concerned about the environment in the lakes. That's the number one reason that people move into that area. It's one of the big attractions for East Bay Township. So, thank you for your time, and it's been a great pleasure to work with the Planning Commission and be involved in the master plan, and have our feedback be listened to. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? I know you just walked in, so if you just step up and introduce yourself, feel free to make public comment.
Thank you. Thank you for having us and for allowing us to have this public comment today. I was actually sitting at my desk doing homework, and I got up, and this is why I look like this. I threw on some clothes and drove on over here. So I did send a email through Claire, and I think it did get to you. I sent some pictures. This isn't regarding, of course, short-term rentals. I'm in the Pine Grove neighborhood, so I wanted to come and support my neighbors. Yes. I now live across the street from the 24/7 party. So Stacy Slater, 854 Pine Grove. I have reached out to the owner, and we are trying to have neighborly relations, you know, because I don't want to get to the point of calling the sheriff. Unfortunately, I can't always keep my husband under control, and I'm at work, so there have been a few discussions that have gone across there, but now we have the party buses that show up. So last 2 weekends, and we started taking pictures, and I did send pictures. You know, the magic bus shows up, and 15 people come out of the house. It's a 3-bedroom, so I believe that's what, 6, 4, 10? So it's regularly 15, 16, 20, we had 20 people one weekend. You'll see from the pictures that I sent, there's cars everywhere. They did agree to finally get off the street because the little street that we're actually on is Ann, but our address is Pine Grove, so there's not a lot of room there. It now looks like a ghetto. So people used to walk their dogs, the kids ride their bikes. We're basically prisoners in our house on the weekends. We don't go out, we don't do anything. We just sit there and wait for the weekend traffic to leave. So again, I don't disregard anyone making some money, for heaven's sakes. That is not the intent here is to stop people from making a little money, but this is way above and beyond, and I had no idea what was going on in Tamarack, although I did see the map, and it doesn't surprise me. We're kind of, the responses I get are, well, these people are contributing to the economy. Well, people have been coming to Traverse City since it was the Grand Traverse back in the 1880s. I mean, even before that. I'm not really concerned about people not coming up to Traverse City and contributing to the economy. So I don't really know if this is the best use of a residential neighborhood. I would just like some peace again, and somebody else mentioned that, we are desperately looking to move now. And I've been looking, I don't know how many houses I've looked at in different counties, but of course I can't get my hands on them quick enough. So therefore we are trapped there. I am concerned about our property value and what happens if, I think I said in my note, do we lie? If somebody wants to buy our house, do we lie and say, no, there's no Airbnb across it? Oh, no, they're quiet all the time? I don't know. We're kind of in a bind now. So I appreciate you listening to me. Thank you again, and I hope that you just kind of take this all in and give us back our residential neighborhood.
Thank you. Next person for public comment.
Hi, my name is Mary Thompson. I live at 5551 Scout Camp Road year-round. And just real quick, I think one of the things that we've looked at earlier today was the prioritization of things, and their communication, as Carol had mentioned, was down to a 3. But one of the things I think we'd all like to see is some kind of requirement while you're looking at the short-term rentals, that they post the local noise ordinance, that they are required to post certain things like the management and the number they can be reached. But they could go on and post those sorts of things. That might avoid some of these problems. I think most people, if they knew the rules, they would follow them. And then the other thing is for on the lakes, we also have, I would hope so. But anyway, on the lakes, we also have, each lake has different wake and no wake times and areas. And if the Airbnb people would be required to post those, I think it would alleviate a lot of problems. So just wanted to reiterate that would be a simple, big bang for the buck thing that I think could go a long way. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Any others for public comment? Okay, seeing no further public comment, we will move on to our agenda items. I don't think I saw any correspondence in particular in here, although we did receive some emails, correct, Claire? We gave away your microphone.
Yes, that's correct. All correspondence came through email, and there was nothing additional beyond that.
Okay, and just so the public is aware, there are, and the boards know this already, there are, an automatic email, one singular email, where someone can email the planning commission and their staff in total, the township board and their staff in total, ZBA, and so forth. So that's what we're talking about. Those are all communicated. We get them all directly that way. Let's see, and they are all, well, it depends. I was going to say they're blind carbon copied, but it depends how they send it, correct? So, with that, we'll move on to new business and the master plan update. And all of you know Claire Carner, our planner, and also just want to mention the other staff that is here. Leslie Corterier is taking the minutes here. She's a planning and zoning office specialist. And Preston Taylor is in the back corner, and he is the zoning administrator in the planning and zoning department. So thank all three of them for being here. And with that, Claire, I'll let you kind of go through an overview.
So for the master plan, I wanted to focus mostly on the action plan tonight. So as you'll recall, the draft action plan, it's been developed mostly by the Planning Commission. It was informed by a number of different documents. The 2015 master plan, so you'll see a lot of the actions and priorities carry over from that 2015 master plan. We used the community survey results from residents, as well as focus group results and final summary, Planning Commission and Board of Trustees. There was an action plan survey, and we have results from that from February of 2021. Also in September of 2020, the Planning Commission had a visioning session, so we used a lot of that to inform the vision as well as the action plan. And then we also brought in some 2020 data and trends. So the census.gov, they've got the American Community Survey 5-year estimates. So we brought in some data from that as well. So the draft action plan, I think it was first reviewed by the Planning Commission in August. We refined it based on some feedback from the Planning Commission. The Board of Trustees and Planning Commission members both completed an exercise of prioritizing that action plan, kind of the updated draft of it. So you'll see included in your packet tonight, we have an updated draft version of the action plan. You'll see, I just went through with mostly everyone provided their action plan feedback, prioritization, so thank you for sending that. You'll see the small numbers and the priority are the responses I got from each individual, and then I went ahead and just put a kind of a collective priority level based on the average. So the priority, I had people prioritize it anywhere from 1 to 4 or NR for not relevant. I also solicited feedback on timeline and responsibility and funding. For those, I kind of just took kind of an average of what the most often response was. A number of people left it blank, so I didn't put all those responses on, but I think I captured responsibility and funding mechanism, all the feedback that we received. So, let's see. You'll see that also in this action plan, there's some that I highlighted in green. Those are the ones that received a 1, and that they're the kind of the highest collective priority based on Planning Commission and board feedback. And then there's some, the very lowest, we didn't have any that received a 4, and I think that was just the averaging of the 1s through the 4s. But the 3s were, had the lowest response. Don't necessarily need to remove them from the action plan. They can certainly be kept in the action plan. That's part of the discussion that I wanted to have tonight. But I know that we're really trying to streamline this and make this action plan very achievable and implementable. And we're looking to get this all done within a 5-year period. So I want it to be as realistic as possible. So these are, some of the ones that rated as a 3, you'll see they might not be the responsibility for the township to take the lead on. They might be more realistically another entity would take the lead on, so it would, you know, be reasonable not to include them in the action plan. So I guess that was kind of, I was hoping to just open this up, open-ended for feedback from planning commissioners and board members. So, and if Beth and John want to kind of facilitate that discussion, but that was kind of all I had for tonight on action plan. I wanted to get feedback from everyone.
John, do you mind if I ask a question of the Planning Commission?
Yeah.
So I don't want to take a full step back, maybe just a quick half step, and get your feedback on the process that you've gone through with the update for the master plan. As we know, it's not a complete rewrite, it's an update, but just kind of see what feedback that you've had. Renee, I know you haven't been on the Planning Commission during that time, but if you've been involved in any focus groups or anything like that, and Mindy, you're on the Planning Commission as well, so just want to see if you had any feedback, more so on the process.
Well, I'll start. I think that the survey, we got a very good response on that regarding our population, and I really like that, that you did that, Claire, and your staff, and thank you. And then I think the focus groups were very informative, and it just really, helped the community engagement that we're looking for in our township. And I really want to thank Claire and Leslie and PT now for doing what they've done, even though that extends the process to do some of those things. I think it shows our community that we're as vested as they are, and it vets the process. So thank you.
Anyone else? And don't feel like you have to answer. I don't mean to put you on the spot. Just wanted to give you an opportunity for the feedback. I, like you, thought that I've been contacted by several people who responded with the survey or participated in a focus group and really enjoyed, being able to participate in those ways. So that's good feedback.
I liked the focus group that we had. The only thing is maybe once or twice we could have reconvened some of those focus groups with more information that they had following some of their input. They played against each other, and one of the big group statements from my group anyway was that they wanted to meet again. So it would take more time, but once we have some of this information now, it wouldn't be a bad idea to reconvene those.
Okay, very good suggestion. That's always a really engaged focus group that you have when they want to reconvene again. Good.
Yeah, I thought it's been a good process so far. I mean, a good mix of input, survey, focus group discussions, planning commissioner involvement. I think it's really helped to create some good points to where we want to go with the master plan. And when I look at the master plan and development, is to understand that this is always kind of a work in progress, and until we kind of get to more of a draft plan. And even then, I think the spirit of a lot of these items will be carried through on a regular basis. Like there does need to be some, particularly when we're looking at these points this evening on the action planning, there's only so many limited resources available within the township. You've got to point to some of these to say, okay, these are the priorities. But all of these, I think, are carried forward in some respect and aren't necessarily forgotten or lost. But it is, I think this is going very well so far.
Okay, terrific. I guess with that, John, I would, as you've been very involved in the process, and of course, this isn't only your, evening gig. You kind of do this for a living too. So we'll take advantage of that and play on that. And if you want to maybe walk us through some of the things that we'd like to discuss tonight with respect to the prioritization, would that be okay?
Sure, yes.
Okay. It's always nice when you spring things on people, isn't it?
Yeah.
He takes it very kindly, you guys. All in stride.
Well, certainly, I think I know for anybody who went through this prioritization process, it's not necessarily something really easy, because it gets, at first, you can kind of identify these priorities, but after a while, it's pretty hard because you're kind of weighting these out a little bit, like what should go number one, what should go number two, what should go number three. So it's, and I don't know how much detail you want to kind of cover each one, or?
Well, I just want to, if I can, just take a second to give a little bit of feedback. When I looked through these, not much, I think part of it being a good process is nothing outright struck me as like, I mean, I thought that it was all good feedback, and I wasn't surprised by any of the feedback from, collectively from the group, so I don't know if anyone else noticed that, but I think so too. Claire, how would you like us to go through this? Through category by category, have some discussion?
Yeah, I guess you could go category by category. We've got the natural resources, housing and neighborhoods for each one. If there was any that stuck out to you as, you know, this is rated lower than I think it should be, this maybe isn't a priority in our township, I need some clarification on what this would look like, this is not specific enough, because we are working to make these actions very specific and measurable. So if there's a way that we can clarify the language and make it more succinct or more implementable, then that would be good feedback to provide too.
Okay. What do you think, John? We'll take it topic by topic?
Yeah.
Okay, you want to review hit the highlights then?
Sure. So why don't we go through each subject, starting with the natural resources section. And I look at the top three. There are updating landscaping standards in the zoning ordinance, and updating and amending the Forest Lakes Overlay District, and then enhancing consistency and predictability of enforcement of existing ordinances. I think one of the things we have to remember is that the master plan supports our zoning ordinance, and that's a key piece to the function of the master plan. And this certainly is identifying, ordinance issues that I think there's a lot of other good suggestions and actions here, but the having that ordinance in place is really important, ensuring that it's done and updated and addressing the issues that I know as the Planning Commission, we've been kind of wrestling with some of that. And part of it is we're restricted by what's in the ordinance or what's not in the ordinance. So there are these other good actions that are also a part of this, but these are some things that really need to be put into place sooner than later, particularly in the case of zoning, because it's only good at that point going forward. So everything else is kind of grandfathered in. So if there's are tweaks or changes to the ordinance, we need to do those sooner if we want to see some of the action or the changes that are happening in the township, particularly, for instance, like in the Forest Lakes overlay area. I think this is kind of indicative of that. Particularly, I think that's why they probably bubble to the top on these.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, any comments from either planning commissioners or trustees?
Just one. When we talk about one of the topics, particularly preserving the clean drinking water by adopting wellhead protections, et cetera, one of the things that I wrote down on mine, and I'll bring it up again, is that I think we need to seriously think the other side, and also what about the septic systems? Some type of working towards doing something with respect to ensuring that the septic systems are in fact adequate, and if nothing else, there should be some type of a adequacy standard at the time of transfer of the property, at minimum. And that's just something that I would add to any overall priority of the township.
Okay, very good. Judy, I see you nodding your head.
I second what Commissioner Gonzalez said. Point of sale might be an opportunity to do that.
Renee, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to ask him if he was referring to potentially a point of sale. I mean, there are townships in Grand Traverse County that are doing it, Long Lake, not many, but then there's entire counties doing it. So, especially when it comes to.
Well, my statement was that at minimum, it would be something which would be an ordinance requiring some type of certification at the point of sale. That would be our minimum.
So what I'm hearing from the three of you is, and I'm not getting into specifics of what would tackle that, but I'm hearing maybe a cause of concern for the impact that septic fields and, more importantly, the failing septic fields would have in our township. Is that correct?
Can I speak to that? So,
Go ahead and pull the mic over so they get good sound on you.
so in my field, obviously, I work with this all the time with inspections and things like that. I can't tell you how many people waive that inspection, which is silly, because that's a very expensive fix. So I guess the question would be, how many failing septic systems are there when people just, especially in this crazy market, when people want that property because they're bidding against others? So I do think there's probably a potential of unmissed failing septic systems.
Okay. Is there any commissioners that share or don't feel that that's a concern? I know myself, I look at our township in particular and just the map of it, and where we have municipal water, where we don't have municipal water and are unlikely to have municipal water, and see my concern then is the impact of failed septic systems on those inland lakes where they're primarily located. Go ahead, Glenn. And you know what, you've got a mic right there and you can turn it on. See, don't you know, we protect the mics on the desks like you don't know. Go ahead.
Anyhow, there is things in place that you can check septic systems now and have been. When they're pumped, if you got somebody with a septic system, not a holding tank, getting pumped 2 or 3 times a year, you probably got a bad system. So there is stuff there that can be used right now, and you can find out roughly what you have for bad systems. And sure, there's gonna be some, but if it's running on the ground, somebody's gonna turn them in because you can smell it.
Other thoughts?
I think it's my understanding that, and, you know, somebody correct me if I'm wrong, because I could be, because that we are the only Great Lakes state that does not have a point of sale requirement. And we also have water and well problems, as we well know. Yeah. So, you know, I think the time has come.
John, do you have any other thoughts or impact or elicit anything with respect to that?
I don't think so at this time.
Okay.
Do you want to move on?
Yeah, I just, does anyone, again, I wasn't surprised by what was green, what was left white, what was left orange, or put to orange. Was anybody else?
I'll add just a little bit of commentary for, so my background with the township, I started on the tree preservation committee last summer. Kind of got some involvement, got familiar with Claire and some of the ordinances around buffering, setbacks for different land uses. And then, of course, we were talking about trees and canopies. And one of the things that kind of struck me was that it looked like ordinances and landscaping standards were a little bit in conflict with each other. I'll give you an example. One of the things that was kind of interesting was for different land uses, say medium density to high density or low density to medium density, they were adjacent to each other. There was a requirement for, I want to say it's an 8-foot side yard setback, I think, between the two of those, and you can potentially construct a 35-foot building, I believe, on the medium density side. But we also, in the landscaping standards, encourage canopy-type trees within that 8-foot setback. So, you know, if you know anything about trees, you can't really establish a canopy-style tree within an 8-foot boundary area of a property line and a 35-foot tall building. So a little bit in conflict with each other. So I guess I'd, provided some commentary in my feedback to this, this survey that maybe both setbacks and/or what the buffering requirements for those differing land uses should probably be addressed. And we'll probably see a lot more of those types of issues, I imagine, with the development coming here in the near future.
Yeah, I also think, too, as we work through this process and leads us to a zoning ordinance update, to look at things that are in conflict with each other and maybe don't serve to get to the intent of the ordinance, that it'll be helpful to go through that process as well. Okay. Well, thank you. John, go ahead, go right ahead.
Sure. Moving on, next is housing in neighborhoods. So I think it's appropriate that the one that kind of rang to the top on that is evaluate enacting a cap for short-term rental licenses as a way to balance the long-term housing supply and support workforce housing. So that seems to be the number one priority by far, at least that was the response of everybody that provided that for related to housing. And then there's some other ones too that are also looking at ways to increase housing options for people within the township. And I think it's, just from my perspective, it's a bit of a challenge because a lot of what housing options that are available are sometimes, there are things that we can do from the township standpoint in terms of tweaking the ordinance and maybe streamlining things, but it's kind of hard because a lot of this is still requires investment that's made by the private sector. But certainly, there are tweaks that can be made to ordinances, creating greater flexibility to allow for those investments being made. I do want to just mention, I was talking with Paul before the meeting, and it seems that we're seeing a big influx or a big interest in apartments and so forth. And there is a challenge, I think, for this township and the greater community of there's a huge demand for rental housing, and some of the housing stock that's available for the rental housing is aged and really hasn't been improved on in many years. So that's where we're kind of seeing that huge influx. Also, that there's been kind of a shift towards apartments and rental housing, also because of the cost of doing single-family residential development is becoming more of a challenge. Extending water and sewer lines is becoming very costly and requires holding costs and a little bit more risk, where apartments are often guaranteed good source of revenue and so forth. But primarily what's driving it is the market in this area, where there really hasn't been a lot of apartments built, and I think that's what we're seeing the pressure. Certainly in East Bay, with the recent reviews that the Planning Commission has done, has been certainly caught our interest. So I think beyond just looking at some of these actions here is just understanding where some of those higher density developments fit within the township, I think are going to be important to really kind of understand. And certainly because when we look later at the future land use map, we're really trying to focus on one particular area, and which makes sense because that's the area that's served by water and sewer, but it certainly is important to kind of figure out what that balance is. So, I don't know if anybody had any comments or thoughts on this one?
I have a question. The fourth one down, support zoning and other policies to facilitate childcare facilities. What could we do to do that? I guess that was my question. As a township, I have a coworker whose wife is the head of one of the daycares around, and they can't get workers to save their lives, and what would the township do in that role, I guess, is my...
So I think that the one thing that stands out to me when as kind of a low-hanging fruit or action that the township could take, there's some barriers in our zoning ordinance right now. And I know I've spoken with Tracy about it, as well as others that have called the township office interested in setting up a daycare facility. And, we have large distance requirements, I think 1,500 feet for for a childcare, for an in-home of like 7 to 12 children. So I think that there's some barriers in place that are much more restrictive than like what the state childcare licensing requirements are. So just looking at, what zoning districts would be appropriate for different sizes of childcare centers and what some of the development standards and spacing would be an opportunity.
Well, I have a thought on the housing in neighborhoods, and was interesting, obviously, to see. It was coincidental and not planned, but to see the green topic was actually on the agenda, so that was very interesting. But I guess I look at the second item, which is update zoning to allow smaller housing units and more flexibility of styles. And I think that that's something that could be very, very interesting, because obviously could lead to some maybe more choices on the spectrum of housing prices or living, the expenses of living. And I know that through the years, we've had contact from property owners or potential developers who are looking to do things that are maybe, I say outside the ordinance, but really smaller than what the ordinance allows. And I tell you what, if just culture shows you anything, the number of Instagram feeds on tiny housing and shows and all of that is huge. Now, there's a downside to that too, because if you ever search what's it like to live in a tiny house, they'll tell you the real truth, right? So but there's some people who maybe don't feel that way, and it could really maybe offer some housing opportunities for someone who, is single or has a very small family or single parent and so forth. Sue?
I just wanted to add too is
Too close. Okay. Yeah, no, I can't go too close. I think part of the problems we're going to see in the future is our growth boundary line. The west side of our township is built pretty well out with the growth boundary where it's at with the power line. On the east side of the township, we've still got a lot of large tracts of land, but they're within the growth boundary line, and it's cost prohibitive for any of those property owners to do any kind of development of any size, because they have to be able to put that multi-million-dollar piece together to put in water and sewer. So maybe part of that too, in this discussion of growth and size of buildings, is adjusting that growth boundary line to effectively allow us to have more growth.
Okay, other comments?
I think Claire did a wonderful job when we talked about the short-term rentals, the differences, what one property can bring in money-wise versus short-term, long-term. So I fear, and I don't have any data, but I fear that a lot of long-term rentals have gone off the market to short-term rentals. Just because I think Airbnb, and we know we saw the CNN article that was promulgated, and we know that Airbnb is a billion-dollar industry. It's a gold mine. And it's the gold rush. And we're in the midst of the gold rush, so we've got to figure out how to manage it.
Matt?
So, just a concern.
Good.
Sorry.
Yeah, just a comment, an idea that's kind of popped into my head over the past few months regarding not necessarily one single issue here, but in the housing and neighborhoods. Obviously, there's an influx of development or a want for some development in East Bay Township, and we'll probably see a lot more of that, I imagine, here in the near future, of course, over the next 5 years during the time which this new master plan is going to be exercised. I know we've got a lot of public land, natural resources in East Bay Township already, but I thought it would be kind of an interesting exercise to think about if we were able to sort of develop a, I don't know, some kind of formula that would hold the township to some kind of standard where the township would actually acquire new public land, protect new public land as a function of a number of new units that were approved to be constructed in the township. So, maybe we don't get down the road 20 years from now and have approved, thousands and thousands of new units potentially in East Bay Township and don't really have anything to show for it except for more busy streets and traffic lights and congestion and people. Maybe there's, a mechanism in place that would say, for every 100 units, the township's going to be required to acquire a certain number of acres for future public use. Just an idea.
I think that's a really interesting observation and creative idea. I will say, before doing something like that, and part of probably analyzing that process, or what would be best, is taking a look at how East Bay Township in particular sits compared to either state land, conserved land, whether through like the Conservancy or privately conserved land, how that is compared to other municipalities in our township. And I remember looking at it at one time, but I don't recall exactly what it is offhand now, but that would be a really interesting thing to take a look at, too.
It's just kind of goes with the old saying, put your money where your mouth is. If we're over here taking survey results from the township, had some good participation for in this master plan rewrite, and I think the common theme was, protect natural resources and, keep things green and more buffering and more trees protection. I think this is a way for us to really kind of step out there and put our money where our mouth is.
Yeah, and I like in the third point that talks about, requiring the pocket parks or the areas of green development within that, because if you are talking apartments or duplexes or condos, we've seen this over COVID, where do people go out to get that green space, which is, scientifically shown to improve people's lives, having that aspect of getting out in nature. I don't do it myself much, but, anyway, so, yeah, very interesting.
One of the, I just want to follow up on that. One of the mechanisms that's mentioned here is on that third bullet item, or that third item, was looking at the plan unit development. There's opportunity there that kind of creates somewhat of a negotiated process of sorts. Not truly is, but it's some give and take between developers and the township, and that's an opportunity where, say, maybe a developer can do higher density, but the trade-off is that they'll provide some type of public amenity, typically like park space, and that makes it kind of built in right into the development itself. So that kind of is one option to look at. Some communities have actually acquired parkland through that process, where the developer says, okay, if you allow me to increase this density, we'll give you 20 acres of land that you can use as park space. So that's one of the mechanisms that can be utilized. The nice part about that is it typically coincides with the development as it's occurring.
Mm-hmm.
So those amenities are put right in there as the development is getting done. So I think that's an important thing, particularly, I know there is a lot of public land that's available to us, certainly, but it's nice to have it when it's in close proximity to where people are living, so that they can walk there, or, walk their dog there, or whatever.
Yeah.
Move on.
Sounds good.
Community facilities. Couple of so this is looking kind of at, there's two kind of functions. One is, the first part is more of the broader infrastructure that's, needed to support the township, and then the other one is really talking more specifically towards transportation-related improvements, non-motorized connections, et cetera. So the first one is the update of the CIP, or Capital Improvement Program, for the township, and that's certainly something that is very important, particularly when looking at knowing that there's limited resources available to the township. So for budgeting purposes, that's something that is needed to get a good sense of what the investments are required to sustain water system, sewer system, and so forth. So I think that makes a lot of sense to have that updated on a regular basis. Should help the township board, particularly when going through budget processes as well. And then the others that are listed as top ones there are the safe routes to school, which I think everybody's been very excited by the opportunity to see that implemented, particularly along the 3-mile corridor. And then updating standards for sidewalks and so forth. So it certainly is prudent to consider that, particularly when there's new development. That's the best point to be having those types of facilities installed is when the developers are there. Improving the properties is a great time to have that installed. And then also at the 31 corridor there in Munson is the trying to find that mid-block crossing, which I know has been a challenge. And I always thought it was great when MDOT redid that highway a few years ago, and I remember initially that they weren't going to do sidewalks, and then there was somehow the ability to get the funding to put those sidewalks in, and you can really see what a difference it's made on that corridor. And there's a lot of people out there. Now we just got to figure out how we can get them safely across the road. So, and it's a process. It's a process. So.
And there's a lot of, not to get too far in those details, but there's a lot of obstacles, with limited right-of-way to be able to have some of the more interesting or creative ideas, like a lot of people mention, over the road and under the road. Well, you don't have the ability for that infrastructure on the sides,
right.
yeah.
And people want to go to the quickest way across. I think there's a lot to learn, just in my travels around the state of Michigan and seeing what MDOT has done in other communities. And I'm not sure what the best way to get there in terms of getting some of these crossings, but I've seen some ones that have occurred in very busy areas. I think one of our challenges is it's busy in the summer months, so which can justify those crossings, but it's the colder months that we have that there may not be as busy. But it seems like there's got to be a way that we can do that for the safety of people along that whole corridor.
I think you'll be happy to know that that is very much on MDOT's radar. I think had COVID not happened, we probably might have seen some more visual demonstration of that activity. But they do have an MDOT employee who specifically handles those types of things, doing the research on that corridor and looking at where they will put a first type of a crossing there. And that will eventually probably involve some coordination with the township as far as what that looks like, because there's just some idiosyncrasies of it being on an MDOT road, meeting the criteria from an engineering standpoint. A lot of things go into that, but I'm glad to see that it's a priority and glad to know that MDOT is working on that.
Yeah, I know one of the challenges that MDOT has is when they look at their criteria is the speed on that. It's well, not necessarily what the people are traveling. We know often they're traveling above the posted speed, but it's that posted speed of 45 through there. When they figure it through their formula, it often will kick out some of those. But certainly, it's one of those things that there's got to be the ability for them to provide that. So it's encouraging to hear that.
Yeah. Very much. They've demonstrated that they are open to looking, outside the traditional criteria, because they realize there's so much specific land use applied over, what some of those statistics are, so.
Sure.
I'll go ahead if I can on the first part where the capital improvements came to the top, and I think that that is an excellent point to be a priority. I would welcome a re-energized look at the capital improvements program. As a matter of fact, I think that may be something that we could, as a township, work into our ARPA discussions that we have yet to have. But even the process of developing a capital program, that could be easily repeated, would be something that we could fund potentially with those ARPA funds or even with our own funds available to us too. So I think that's a really good project that could be done in the very short term. I would say we probably want to look at having some consulting help with that just because of expanding the time and capacity of staff.
Yeah, and I will say, a lot of these actions that have risen to the top, one being the capital improvement program, are requirements of the RRC certification, so it's, and there's some funding available for a 75% match of MEDC to match township to hire consultant for assistance, so we can certainly look into that. We're planning to do that with the zoning ordinance update.
Cool.
Great. Okay, and I think on the bottom half, as you were talking about those, John, I think that those are all things that have really been at the top of our plate. You know, we've been discussing all those. I've got my Safe Routes to School mug here, and we're kind of moving forward on all of those. So we did hear, right, Claire, that they have done some reviewing, and they were, the feedback from the board that analyzed this stuff was very happy with the materials that were submitted. So it might be a long way from there to funding, but, you know, at least it's a good indicator.
Yeah,
Right.
That was the feedback, was that it was a favorable review by the committee, and so.
That's great.
Any more on that one, or? Good.
I don't, any,
All right, we're going to move on to economic development. Kind of the two halves here. One is kind of in general support for businesses and creating a climate for future business investment and expansion in the township. That's kind of the top half of that one. And then the bottom one is really focused on the corridor, the US 31 corridor, and supporting economic development activities. And that's where the highlighted one there is really the area that we've kind of tagged as the Beach District, and really trying to engage businesses and property owners in there, and facilitating a process to enhance placemaking along that area so it's more attractive. Certainly have the framework to really build on that and make that a more comfortable place for visitors, and as well as people here locally that frequent the businesses that are there. And it's kind of a main street for the region, and I think certainly is a great opportunity, but looks like everybody's kind of on board with that one, with a lot of ones that kind of perked up to that. And that's, to me, it seems to be like an ongoing process. I think it's important too, just my personal thoughts on that is that it's really important to engage those businesses, and hopefully we'll, while it's something I think the township wants to facilitate and see moving forward, it's really about a lot of the business owners there that really should kind of be the key leaders to that. And we can, as a township, be supportive of that. But the business owners really have the ability to really take that to the next level. And certainly when you've seen other places and visited places that are similar to this, you see the investment that's being made. I'll be quite honest, it's a little frustrating to see a couple of the sites that were cleared and kind of sitting vacant right now, and I think that's unfortunate because we were anticipating that there was going to be some of that investment happening there, so hopefully that'll get back on track here in the future, and 'cause right now it's a bit of a blemish on the corridor, but certainly that's exciting opportunity for those business owners as well as the township. So.
yeah, I was really pleased to see, surprised actually, I don't know if I was surprised, but I was heartened to see the priority ratings that my peers gave that too. I mean, I know that we've talked a bit about it before, but to really, put those priorities, pen to paper and say that that's high on the priority list, I think is good. Especially, I couldn't agree more with what John says about the businesses really need to invest and take hold of be part of that process too. But I think as a local unit, we could really be the initial Flint, not Flint, the city, Flint, that starts the fire. You know what I'm saying? As I said, I don't do the outdoors much, so I don't start campfires much, so I probably shouldn't use that terminology. But anyway, but I think that we can kind of foster that, and I think that that would be a good thing.
The only thing that I would add on that one is I think in the responsibility and the funding that we need to add MDOT, and we also need to include the utilities. To let them know that that is one of our priorities, is to get those lines buried.
Sure.
And
Sure, good points.
It's amazing what that makes a difference if you've been to places. I know when I drive into Petoskey and you just notice all you do is see single light poles. It's really clear how the view is. And I know that was a big infusion of dollars by the city itself, but just to see how that changes a corridor is incredible. And I know one of the things we've talked about there was, kind of preserving some of the identity of that corridor is really important, because that's what makes it attractive. I mean, I think when visitors come here, they're looking for something that is a little bit different, and I think there's some of those pieces to it. Like we talked about the beautiful white pines that are along that corridor. That's really a unique asset along there that kind of creates the identity, obviously along with the bay itself. And so all those pieces put together, it would be really nice to kind of get some of those lines out of there, even if we could relocate them somewhere else. I don't know where, but it just ideally would be buried.
You mentioned going to other areas where, they've done that and you notice that. One of the things I notice when I go to different areas is if they have a different type of sign ordinance, especially, ones that are trying to achieve a certain look and less visual distraction, but still good placemaking and directions and so forth. But I noticed that right away with that type of consistent signage in the ordinance. I know that that's a really tough topic on 31, because I can remember businesses saying, don't touch my sign, because that's aerial real estate for them. And but yet at the same time, it makes a big impact on a corridor.
Yeah, one of the reasons that really kind of drives that too is the speed of the road. So the faster the speeds, the bigger the signs need to be. So if we can, kind of calm some of that through there, and it would allow them, it's going to be at a scale that they could, accommodate smaller signs. And you're right, though, you can see the difference in sign ordinances from community to community, and it certainly makes, I think, an impact, something that is, makes it more tasteful, I think, ultimately. But certainly we want to be there supporting the business, so it's about finding that balance.
Yeah.
So.
Definitely. Other points on economic development?
Moving on, we have, just kind of maybe put these together, farmland and agriculture preservation, along with governance and regional cooperation, where these kind of the last two on this page here. And I'll just, so I think in the terms of the farmland and agricultural preservation, I think there's, if there are ways to maintain character of just agriculture and the ruralness of the area, and I think it's important to, when I think of farming and agriculture, I think a lot of times we're just thinking of crops and so forth, or livestock, but we should also be thinking, particularly in this township, of timber and so forth, and that's an important part of our agriculture in this area. So I think that's important, if there's our ways that we can, kind of preserve that identity and character to the area. And then the regional cooperation and governance is certainly communication. What we're doing here this evening, joint meeting of the Township Board and the Planning Commission is really the engagement of residents here that are really concerned and wanting to help out and for the best of the township, I think is important. If there's ways that we can communicate that out to the public, I think is really important. So.
I'm excited to tell you that, first of all, I'm happy to see this was important to planning commissioners and board members, and just to let you know, we've internally had some discussions here about expanding our capacity to be able to communicate in a way that's more up-to-date, social media, those types of things, regular, maybe email blasts that go out rather than signing up for ability to receive newsletters, email, or that type of thing. Right now, we don't have the ability to really monitor that to the level that's necessary, given all of the technology that's out there and the time that it takes. And I can tell you that I have, Sue and Tracy know I've relayed this story to them, where I've sat in on a conference with a lady from a downstate, a large township, city-sized township, and is the social media and communications person for that township. And the tremendous time that she puts into that job, not only from a total hours standpoint, but from the last thing she does at 11 o'clock at night is check all accounts. First thing she does, 8 o'clock or whatever it is when she's getting her coffee, is check all the accounts. And then so it's really something where you need to have the capacity to be able to manage those things in a proactive way. So we're taking a look at that to see if we can leverage some areas to do that. So we'll continue to have those conversations, and if we don't, and we need aid in identifying the resources, we can do that as well.
It's hard to do.
Yeah.
Especially when you have limited staff, because, at the same time, to kind of get that out there, those messages out there, and then, you get somebody walking in the door or somebody on the phone, and you're trying to respond to people, it's really hard to get that information out. It does, I can see where it takes somebody to really do that. It's not that it's not a priority, it's just, it's hard to balance when you got a full plate of things to do. So it is hard. But I think it's important, and I think the really cool thing about township government is it really does allow opportunities for people to serve in a lot of different capacities.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe we can get somebody that'd be interested in that.
Yeah.
To help out.
Also, I think one of the things, though, with our website, while some things may not be perfect, I do think that we've been able to leverage it for some more transparency. So I do feel like we operate in as transparent a manner as absolutely possible within the capacity that we have. Literally, one thing that, has always kind of been there, but really is more so lately in the past 12, 24 months or so, is when you receive a board packet, every member of that public receives that same board packet, same time. Same thing with the township board. That goes on the website the very same time you get it. So there's that transparency that's a good thing. The ability to reach you as a board member or commissioner to say, I want to let you know, this is on your agenda. I'm not crazy about it, or kudos, I love it. That's really appreciative of that. We've also had a long-standing relationship, right, Glenn, with having a public and government television. And so that's been something we've really invested in, because I hate to say we don't have to do that, but we have funds and they could be spent in different ways, and many townships do. But we've invested with that local government access, and so that's been a good thing. And so we've been on TV with our meetings for a long time. We now have just about every board televised, every meeting televised. Board of Review we still don't do. It's 16 hours of, sometimes, if we're lucky, watching the paint dry. So so we don't do that one yet, but.
Yeah, I think it's great, all those different, because it's noticeable. I think that's why we get, at least I've noticed at the planning commission level, we get a lot of engagement and people coming in, and certainly those avenues are working.
I do notice too what our peers are doing, whether it's within our region or whether it's statewide, because oftentimes I will look for resources from another municipality and see how either easy it is to get or gosh darn difficult. And so, it's easy to compare ourselves in that way, so. And so, for example, if you want to see our budget, it's pretty darn easy to find. You might have to flip through some tabs, and, because everybody's idea of organizing is a little bit different, the information, but.
I guess if there's no more on the action plan, we can take a look at the future land use map.
Let me make one more comment real quick. Something, again, that's kind of occurred to me here recently, just thinking about it, may be worthwhile considering for master plan, maybe a zoning ordinance update or a combination of the two. I imagine 5 years from now, be a completely different situation out there in the automobile market. There's a big push for electrification. There is some concern, I know, in other states that are a little more ahead of the curve, such as California, where electric vehicle charging stations are now the new sort of Airbnb, although a little more benign than having a bachelor party at a house. People are using these things as revenue streams, so now you've got a house. If you have the electric capacity, you can throw 3 or 4 vehicle chargers at your house and start servicing people. Interesting thing is, and obviously charging people to charge their cars there. Interesting thing is, there will be a shift, I imagine, in the dynamic of gas stations. Gas stations now are, littered up and down the interstate from Detroit to Traverse City, where people travel back and forth, and they can stop anywhere they feel like to fill up with gas. These new cars are all automated, they're smart, they figure out where you need to stop to sort of optimize your duration of your travel. So just in my mind, the ranges on these cars now put them in a situation where you could have tens of thousands of people driving their electric vehicles up from downstate during the summer, being able to make an entire drive up to Traverse City without stopping for a charge, and now you've got tens of thousands of cars in the Traverse City area that need to plug in somewhere. So there probably should be some thought put in the near future about, how zoning ordinances are handled. I could imagine a situation, wild, wild west, where somebody wants to come in, a developer, and install an electric gas station now, where we don't have gas pumps, but we've got a parking lot full of electric vehicle charging stations. So maybe worthwhile thinking about. And I'm not an expert in the subject, so don't look at me.
Good point.
Well, it's interesting because I've noticed a lot of these charging stations they're every, you can see them in a lot of different
Yeah.
places.
Uh-huh.
It's because the beauty of that is where, in case of, gasoline stations, they need large storage and so forth.
Right.
Where, electric, you just kind of need some attachment to the grid, so they can be in areas like parking lots, so they can be diffused a little bit more, but still, it makes a good point. We need to be anticipating what some of these, what the impact is going to be, particularly on the land use side of things.
Yeah, I mean, if you, I've read a little bit online about it, but if you think about a gas station, just doing some rough numbers, a gas station with 10 pumps could do 60 to 70 fill-ups an hour, whereas electric vehicles need 30 to 45 minutes even on a supercharger on these fast commercial-sized chargers to charge up. So now you've cut that capacity down substantially. How much extra space do you need for all these cars to park there to meet the capacity demand? So.
And what do you want them to be doing while their car's getting charged?
Right, and where do you want this stuff to be? Now, I guess the reality is, thinking out loud is, in the past, you're driving down the road and you look for a gas station. That's why everybody has the signs, and they list how much the price is per gallon, way up high. Well, now these cars are smart. It tells you where to go. Is there really a need to have gas stations located on main thoroughfares right in the front of public view, or can you put these things behind areas where they're not quite as visible? Just something to think about.
Matt, I think Elk Rapids Village Market has 2 charging stations, so they expect people to come in, charge your car, and shop.
Yeah, yeah.
So I'm really thinking, that's pretty advanced. I mean, when I saw them there, I was surprised.
Yeah, I think that's been a big push for a lot of
Yeah.
small downtowns to have some as an amenity, but it's going to shift pretty quick from an amenity that communities are offering for free to encourage you to shop to something that
Yeah.
is legitimately going to cost money and turn into revenue stream for people.
The only ones I've seen so far in East Bay, I've seen them at Burger King. I don't know what you do when you're waiting there, go into the Playland, I'm not sure, but, yeah, that's true too, that's true too. But has anyone seen them elsewhere in East Bay?
Not East Bay, but
Yeah.
I'm just thinking, you don't want to have your electric station with your car wash.
Yeah.
And I think they had some grants out for them initially, but they were only in very specific places where where they could get the critical mass they needed to have those. Because I know we didn't register for any of those. They got Blair and I think, what's the one store, Blaine's or
Blaine's Farm.
Blaine's, is that it? Yeah.
I would imagine the automotive industry is going to come out with some grants or something, some kind of incentives to get them in places, because if they want to sell cars, they're
Yeah.
gonna.
I mean, it's going to be a necessary reality. It's whether you want to be ahead of
Front
the
or
ability
back.
to kind of control how those things are installed and where they're put in.
There you go.
Sounds like a good thing to look into with solar and wind.
Yeah.
There you go.
Okay, thank you. And you wanted to move into the map, John?
Sure. I know this was something that we talked a lot about at the Planning Commission in terms of, in some respects, I'm not even sure what would be, maybe Claire, if you can kind of maybe highlight some of the things?
Yeah, sure. So the Planning Commission had a future land use work session talking about the future land use map back in July. So we had a whole bunch of maps posted around the room. We looked at the zoning map, we looked at the existing land use, the 2015 future land use map. We looked at location of utilities, water and sewer, the water and sewer master plan of where those utilities are likely to expand to in the future. We looked at natural features, locations of public and protected lands, wetlands. And so kind of the idea was to kind of look at all of these and kind of think through what do we want and what do we want for this future land use map? So how do we want the township to grow and develop over the next 15 to 20 years? What do we want? So not necessarily what is the zoning, but how do we want kind of the future zoning and land use to look? And I would say, we talked about the appropriateness of the urban growth boundary, if there was some reason for adjustment, moving it, when we had some discussions about that. I would say, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but from what I gathered after that work session was that generally the Planning Commission was pretty happy with the future land use map, the way that it is. I went ahead, the only change that we're recommending is basically reclassifying the Elmbrook site as the medium to high density, which is consistent with the surrounding designations. But there wasn't really anything else that stood out to me for changing future land use designations. We did talk a little bit about industrial and kind of most appropriate locations for industrial, for future industrial parks. We talked about maybe some flexibility of uses, and so within the various land use designations, maybe taking a look at tweaking kind of what land use, what types of land uses are permitted, either by right or special land use permit, so that's kind of getting into the more finer detail. We talked a little bit about the lakes area. Are there some kind of changes to to really ensure the types of development density that we're looking for, because right now the lakes area could, potentially develop at a higher density than kind of what our future land use is looking at the 1 dwelling unit per acre. But I guess, I'd open it up again to Planning Commission and board input, but I didn't hear from the Planning Commission that there was any substantial changes that needed to be made to the future land use map. Which made our job a little easier. it didn't seem like it needed a full overhaul, and so, the direction that I was hearing.
And I just maybe would add that, when we focus a lot on the future land use map when we look at, developments that are being proposed, but it's also important to understand that this map is part of the master plan overall, so there are goals and objectives and, comments made towards, development and types of development, descriptions of all the future land use designations that all contribute to how decisions are made, whether it's related to a rezoning or some type of development proposal. So it's just, why this is really does, because obviously it outlines all the different parcels and what they're designated. There is, when we look at different things related to land use development and changes, we're looking at the full document, that is the master plan. So it's important to understand that there's a lot of content that goes with this, and it's not just a map on its own. So it's important to kind of recognize that.
Okay, any follow-up comments with the Planning Commission, having reviewed this before, or new ones from the Township Board? I do think that, go ahead, feel free to interrupt me if you have a second thought you want to say, but I going through the different sections and the future land use map and knowing the process that you guys have gone through with the meetings, I think, great job. Very much appreciate staff's work on this, and also planning commissioners too, because I know that it's meant extra meetings and kind of, yeah, exactly. Is there anything else you want to go through on that, or should we move into the next agenda item?
I think we can move on to short-term rentals unless there's comments.
Yeah, I just want to make sure everyone got a chance if they wanted to comment. Okay, with that, we'll move on to the topic of short-term rentals and potential amendments to the current ordinance. You will see on page 17 that there is an overview of the discussion and questions and also the attachments. And you do have a legal opinion with respect to short-term rental considerations, map, the planner's memo, and further legal opinion. So Claire, do you want to kind of do an overview?
Sure. So I think with what has maybe been articulated a little bit at this meeting, but the evaluation of a cap for short-term rental was really precipitated by concerns voiced by homeowners contacting planning and zoning department, really about this proliferation of short-term rental and high concentration in certain neighborhoods. And so when we mapped them all out, you'll see both Pine Grove neighborhood as well as the Lakes area both have higher concentrations of short-term rental. There's also, observations from staff. We've had a lot of, realtors or prospective buyers contacting planning and zoning department with interest in, purchasing a property as more of an investment property, wanting to make sure that short-term rentals were permitted. So those were kind of the trends that we were seeing. So we engaged a law firm they're based, I think, in Kalamazoo, but they've had a lot of experience working with communities throughout Michigan on short-term rental ordinances. They were very familiar with kind of the state legislation and kind of tracking that and how we could kind of craft a licensing ordinance that we might be able to still have some, regulation or control of the activities, without controlling the land use, which might be more of the focus of the state legislation. So the first step that they recommended to us in evaluating this possible cap was to really look closely at data and metrics in the township so that we're not putting an arbitrary cap on short-term rentals, or we're not just saying, we're capping it at, the current level, or, kind of having data to back up what that cap would be. So as Beth mentioned, there are two memos included in your packet from the attorney. One is a summary of metrics to evaluate, and so I can go through the staff memo that that I drafted was basically evaluation of those metrics that were recommended by the firm. And then the second memo that they put together was some guidance and discussion questions to help inform a possible cap. And so you'll see just on the cover page, I kind of went through and I think that there's some discussion questions that will be really helpful for the Planning Commission and Township Board to go through. After, I would like to just go through the metrics and kind of summarize some of the information and data that we collected. I also think it would be a good opportunity, we've got Preston Taylor, our zoning administrator here, he can come up and just kind of provide you with an overview of enforcement, because I know that that's an issue and that's something that we're really looking to ramp up and to make sure that we have that consistent process in place, so he can speak to some of the enforcement concerns. Would you like me to just go through the memo that I put together? It's got all the data in it.
That sounds good. Claire, I did just want to note, these aren't issues that just came to the surface with COVID. Just want to make that note, because a lot of things did change with the pandemic. But these were things we were seeing and comments that we were hearing prior to that. As you guys know, when Jake Myers was here and he was analyzing a lot of the information too. So I just wanted to note that.
Okay, so as you know, the short-term, the licensing ordinance was adopted in July of 2019, so we've had it for just over 2 years. As of August 2021, when we were compiling all this data, we had 126 licensed short-term rentals in the township. So I will say that that's not all of the transient rentals that are available. There's a lot along the US 31 corridor, which are the timeshare, and so those are ones that the township is not currently is not currently licensing, and those are kind of the resort condominiums. So those are not currently being licensed. And then the other areas, the exempt from the ordinance is the cabin courts. And so that's another area that I think would be a good opportunity to have some conversation and guidance, direction from both Township Board and Planning Commission. Right now, cabin courts are exempt from the short-term rental licensing ordinance. There's a recommendation from the Planning Commission, which will be before the board, to eliminate cabin courts, new cabin courts from the ordinance. So all cabin courts would become legal non-conforming uses, and new cabin courts would not be permitted to be established in the Lakes area. So that will be coming before you in November. And so we'll need to look at kind of how it's regulated under the short-term rental licensing ordinance. So some of the data that we use to evaluate some of these metrics, we had the American Community Survey. The 5-year estimate has a lot of housing and, occupancy data. Zillow, Granicus, and Host Compliance have a lot of data. Realtor.com, we found a number of different data sources to help compile some of this. But some of the metrics they were recommending we looked at, one was average rent costs. So we found that the average rent in East Bay Township, this seems a little bit low, but it was in the American Community Survey at $899 per month. I think that it's not probably limited number of data points. So it was, the estimate was probably had a higher margin of error. But that's in comparison to the mean nightly rental in East Bay Township at $415 a night. Based on that, a short-term rental owner would only need to rent their short-term rental 26 nights per year to make the same revenue compared with a long-term rental. Another metric they recommended that we looked at is just yearly profit from renting out short-term rentals. So with the occupancy rate in our region of 77% for short-term rentals, we would estimate that the total revenue would be approximately $75,000 for a short-term rental at that occupancy rate, which which is, again, short-term rentals they can only turn over once every 4 days, but, and that compares with less than 11,000 revenue for a longer-term rental. This surprised me, but I think it's what we've been hearing anecdotally. Currently, there's only 3 long-term rental listings in all of East Bay Township that are open for occupancy, compared with 315 short-term rental listings in East Bay Township. And again, the reason that that's so much higher than our number of licensed short-term rentals is the regional business district. It's counting all of those resort condominiums along the waterfront, as well as likely probably some of our cabin courts. We have very low vacancy, and the American Community Survey is tracking long-term renter, or kind of more of the vacancy associated with long-term occupancy. I think probably much of our vacancy is the seasonal flex for people that have 2 homes. Another metric that we were encouraged to take a look at is the price-to-rent ratio. And so this is calculated by dividing the median home price by the median annual rent. And so that price-to-rent ratio in East Bay Township is about 30. And so the guidance we were given is if it's 15 or less, if that ratio is 15 or less, it's probably better to buy a home. If it's 21 or more, it's probably better to rent. So this clearly shows that in East Bay Township, kind of based on this ratio, that it would be better to rent, although there's very limited supply of long-term rentals in the township. Looking at housing tenure, and again, the number of units that are occupied by owners is 86%. In comparison, 14% of homes are rented by long-term renters. And I actually looked at Traverse City and Garfield Township just for a comparison, and they're about 60 and 62% respectively for the number of owner-occupied homes versus they've got about 40% of renter-occupied. So it's quite a bit higher both in Garfield Township and the city of Traverse City. And I think that kind of goes back to East Bay Township traditionally being more of a bedroom community. The township has much fewer total supply of apartments compared to like a Garfield Township and Traverse City. And then, let's see, what else did we take a look at? The number of, they encouraged us to look at the number of owners or investors of short-term rental compared to the total number of listings. So are there certain investors that are buying up many, many short-term rentals in the township? We found that there's 8 individuals that have 2 or more licensed short-term rentals. 4 of these have 2. 2 of them have 3. There was 1 that had 8 rentals. So for the most part, short-term rental owners have only 1 property in East Bay Township from what we can tell based on their listing. But there are some that have multiples. We took a look at the disruption and tracking of some of the complaints. So, I do think that this is underestimated, and given our revamping of some of our enforcement, but we are seeing that a lot of these complaints center on parking, noise, trash, kind of disruption of the neighborhood and single-family kind of use that was traditionally before short-term rentals. We looked at, again, concentration of short-term rentals, and there is some concentration, which was included in your packet and mentioned. And then the other, metric that we're interested in looking at is just the housing cost burden. And so, 47% of renters in Grand Traverse County pay over 30% of their income towards rent, which is considered to be cost burden. So it's just another thing to think about. And so all of these different metrics kind of help us take a look at, evaluate what are some of the issues and challenges at more of like a population and workforce standpoint from the housing supply and housing market, and kind of what is that impact that our short-term rentals are having. So we sent all of this data and information to the firm that we're working with, and they kind of evaluated, they found it interesting and kind of provided us with some guidance and some questions to go through with the board and planning commission. And my hope is that after tonight, hearing some guidance from you all, we could take that and begin to draft ordinance updates based on your guidance and feedback.
Okay, very good. One of the things that comes to my mind when I take a look at this map is, I think, this is just an observation, is the reason, obviously, that we have the concentration in the lakes area and then Pine Grove, obviously, is the amenities, right? So the Inland Lake, East Grand Traverse Bay, the Tart Trail, those types of things. I do think one of the reasons that we don't have a lot of more recently developed subdivisions in here giving public comment with respect to short-term rentals is, of course, because we don't allow them where there's deed restriction, and those that have been developed more recently typically have deed restrictions than compared to maybe some places that were developed way more before that was standard practice. So that was one observation that I had, but Claire, do you want, let's go through the questions then? Okay.
Do you want to hear a little bit about some enforcement, or do you want to go through?
Sure. Oh, yes, absolutely. Thank you.
So I just want Preston just to talk a little bit about the overview approach, the hotline, and kind of what our approach is on that, and then we talk a little bit about the
Okay,
Hi, Preston. How are you tonight?
I'm good. Preston Taylor, zoning administrator. You may have heard of me. I'll try to be as brief as I can, but as thorough as I can, and go on record to say I despise speaking to you or addressing you with my back to you. So please know that though I'm facing this way, that I'm trying to address some of the concerns that you brought here tonight. And for those who stuck around to hear this portion, thank you for being here. Enforcement is necessary evil when it comes to this. There were some minor oversights discovered on the tracking of complaints, and I'll accept some responsibility. I was not aware that host compliance is no longer being used as our watchdog when complaints are made, but some changes have been already implemented, and I'd like to go over those real quick. The website now reflects my contact information, and when you go to the website under short-term rentals, there's a process that is requested that be followed. And this in my opinion is just paramount. The first item on there is that you contact the agent or the license holder of the property where the complaint is coming from. It's kind of like being on call, being an employee on call. They have an obligation to answer that call. And if it's at 2 or 3 in the morning, that's when the call gets answered. If it's not being answered, that's a violation. And if that's brought to my attention, now we can pursue that and address it. And I just dealt with an incident on Monday where a call was placed and they didn't respond to it. And it was in the early hours. And that has been addressed already with that property owner. And there was an emergency contact information that was incorrect. That has been updated as well. The second thing on the list on our website is to call me. 947-8681, extension 3 comes right to my desk. And I'm also available by email. And I encourage you to let me know that. That's all part of the tracking process and helps me, the enforcement arm of the township, to address issues that are there. If I don't know they're there, I can't address them. And then the third thing, and this is based on my previous career being a police officer. I want to say that I do believe this is a call that law enforcement should take. I went to hundreds of these types of calls as a police officer. I didn't like it. But that police officer is also called a peace officer, and that's what they're charged in doing, is reestablishing peace if it's not there. A party raging at 3 in the morning is not peaceful. Even if they don't necessarily mitigate the issue or do a full report on it, there's a eternal digital record that they were called to that property, and there's a narrative that is completed by dispatch that'll say what the nature of the call is, and then the officer has an opportunity to update in his computer what they found when they went there. That is foilable information, and portions of that information are shareable with me without even going through FOIA. And again, this is kind of a neat, I have that relationship with our community police officers. They know me. We used to work together. I can get that information from them readily, which can then be documented in our system and tracked. So all three of those are super important. And again, especially that first one is reaching out to those who are responsible, that agent or that license holder of the property. And to speak real quick on the dissemination of information, in the ordinance, they are obligated to share with those prospective renters the ordinance on fireworks and the noise complaint. Although it's written that they could just direct them to a website, it's kind of like a little bit of that old adage, you can lead a horse to water. They could have documents laying there. They could even make them sign something. It doesn't necessarily mean they're going to read it. And I would like to work on that a little bit and make sure that our agents or license holders know that how important that dissemination of information is. Enforcement action, it can be a citation. I have a good reputation with the 86th District Court. I'd like to maintain that. The better and more clear the information that I have that would potentially lead to a citation is then better upheld in court. And so leaving me a voice message saying, hey, there was loud music at this property, I would want more than that. And you're welcome to call me. I'm at my desk a lot, and be happy to take your call. Email is another good way. But anyway, I'm rambling here on that. That good information is imperative, so that I have details and know that if this is a reoccurring issue, if it's specifically noted it's music or it's trash or it's noise level, that's important for me to know. Also, without going down getting on a tangent, going down a sidetrack here, know that in Michigan in April there is jail reform and bond reform. And that is working against us with some enforcement efforts in the courts, and there's delays and stuff. And one of the things that I heard unofficially spoken was the ability for law enforcement to address noise ordinances, even though it's a police power ordinance. And although they may go and tell them to turn it down, whether or not the prosecutor's office will support that citation can be in question based on some new reform that has come out. And you can read on that online. So again, and I bring that up because if I know, I can write that ticket. It doesn't have to be a police officer wondering whether or not it's going to be authorized. I can write the citation. I can move forward with the process. So switching gears a little bit to cabin courts, working with my partner in crime, Leslie, we are getting a nice handle on the number of cabin courts that are in existence, good contact information, addresses, number of properties on each cabin court that's noted. I found a lot of information that we did have needed updating, wasn't current, and I'm having a relatively good amount of success in getting that information current too, so we know all the cabin courts that are out there. And I rambled kind of quickly. Do any questions for me, board?
That's all good information, PT. Thank you so much for being here to share that with us. Wasn't able to share something with you before the end of the workday today, but actually it will still stay the same phone number and extension. We'll just be changing what phone number that rings to. So it'll still stay extension 1, which is the short-term rental extension. So that was there and is accurate. We're just going to have it ring to you.
Okay, thank you for saying that, because also, there was a form that was expected to be handed out that was generated by us as well that had the hotline number on there. That is incorrect, and that is being updated. And there was also a pamphlet that had that number on there, and that is being omitted and updated as well. And will be re-emailed to the license holders or agents of those short-term rentals.
Right, and so just real briefly, for the public's information, and for board members too, the host compliance is what we used to use, a hotline. That was part of their package of services that we did so many years ago. Obviously, as they ramped up the cost of their services, and we found that the hotline didn't really do much more than, people could call, get their information, leave it, but it really wasn't any more than trying to contact that person directly, that homeowner, property owner directly, or, leaving a message here at the township, or getting in contact with the CPO. So we did drop that service because we didn't really find it to be particularly effective for the cost that was incurred through Granicus. So I think this will be just fine, and yes, we did need to get those documents updated. Sorry, Sue, I was thinking it was Mindy.
Oops. A little stronger than I thought. I just wanted to make a clarification as the FOIA coordinator. If someone does wish to FOIA those incidents that CPOs have visited to those locations, you would FOIA that through the Grand Traverse County Sheriff's Department.
Absolutely.
The township is not that hub for that information, and I really don't want to send anyone out of denial. I would like them to be informed now that if they are wishing to receive information on an incident that a police officer attended one of the short-term rentals, they need to reach out to the Grand Traverse County Sheriff's Department.
Thank you for that.
It has been great to have PT network with some homeowners who have been particularly negatively affected, because it is so important to going through the process that those accurate records are kept by them to convey to us so that we can keep the best record possible too. Yeah, definitely. Any other comments or questions with respect to that enforcement? Thank you so much, Preston. Really appreciate it. Mindy?
So have we had any short-term rentals that have lost their license?
No, we have not. I particularly want to thank PT because he changed around his schedule for us this evening so he could visit with you about that. So I really appreciate that. Okay, with that, go ahead, Claire.
So now for the fun part is our discussion questions. So the first part, and you'll see I included a copy of the short-term rental licensing ordinance. There's a, section 1 states the broad purpose. And I think that the purpose covers partially the intent of the short-term rental ordinance. But I, kind of based on some of the issues that have been brought to the attention, do we want to add any elements to the purpose or policy statement that have to do with, reducing impact on housing availability, the cost of living, preserving the character of single-family neighborhoods, minimizing land use conflicts, those types of policy statements. So that was the first piece that I wanted you to just take a look at.
Any comments with respect to that?
It's on page
17?
Yep, 31
Oh.
of the packet.
am I on page 17 goes over some of that too, doesn't it? 30, what?
She's at the ordinance, though.
Oh, okay.
31 is just the ordinance.
Got it.
Says section
Yep.
1
Purpose section.
Yep, thank you.
For my part, the answer is yes.
All of the above.
Yes,
Add it all in.
yes. You know, only modified by what we eventually create as a new ordinance. But other than that, the answer is yes.
The answer is yes to add these,
Yes.
to amend the purpose to include these bullet points that were listed.
Affirmative.
Yes, okay, thank you.
I would change, though, the word traditional rentals to long-term.
Yeah.
I have, my feedback on this is, I really look at that minimizing land use conflicts and think that that is very important. I mean, what do we do here, Euclidean zoning, right? It's all to maintain stability and consistency. And so minimizing those land use conflicts is huge. We see that in other areas too. And so I think that that's really a priority. Because often I think people, that's the majority of their concern is where you have incompatible uses of affecting each other. And so I think that's very important. As far as the impact on housing availability and the cost of living, the one thing that I would say is, obviously, if you have competition and you have more potential buyers, right, then of course you're just going to drive that price up. But I will say, I think it's a little too easy to blame STRs for all of the costs that we've seen. Number one, in the pandemic, but also short-term rentals prior to the analysis that the Planning Commission did on short-term rentals, which was extensive before there was ever even an ordinance in place. But during that time and prior, short-term rentals happened. They just happened under the radar. And so that effect was already being seen on the housing. So I guess where I hear the comments and trust me, if there is ever a topic I am middle of the road on, this is it, because I understand why STR owners are doing what they're doing. I don't fault them for that, but I also really understand what it's like to have a family. And if I invested my largest investment in that house, and then I had things going on that weren't conducive to raising a family happening next to me, that would be extremely troublesome. So I think it's really learning to balance this. And so that minimizing land use just stands out to me, and the preservation of neighborhoods personally stands out to me. Susan?
Well, and I understand what we've been hearing tonight, but I'm hearing loud and clear is we fell through the cracks on our enforcement. And it sounds like we have a new process in place. It became kind of a train wreck, listening to people having concerns, having violations happening all around them with no way to fix it. I still, I guess that's just a statement more than a fix or, whatever. But I also want to make sure that whatever we're doing doesn't get hijacked by what our legislators are going to try to do, especially when we hear that both our senator and our representative for this area are co-authors and very involved in legislatively taking over the short-term rental concept and taking it away from the locals.
Yeah, those are good comments, Sue. If initial feedback on one of them is with respect to the enforcement, I think that having seen this ordinance in place for a while and also kind of documenting or analyzing how we want to handle some of those things. There's a new energy to put towards that enforcement. But I will say, I think the past troubles have been primarily the documentation of that and the ability to move forward in enforcement. Don't think it's necessarily been that there hasn't been aid out there available to homeowners, because we've always had those CPOs. We've always had, that to be able, I mean, PT just told you, as a CPO, he was out there on lots of those types of calls. So I think that's one important point. And then, gosh, I wanted to mention something when you said the second part you were talking about after. Second part of your statement. Legislature. We did, Claire and I specifically talked with Chris Patterson about this, and I asked him what I've always heard, and which is our ordinance as a general law ordinance and the way it's structured would have the strongest ability to withstand any change in legislation. And Claire, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I understood the feedback from him after our initial conversation, and when we had a follow-up conference with him, was that he felt like we were in a very good place considering the legislation that was being considered. And while you can't always say that we won't be impacted by, something that they might not do in the future, he felt like we would be minimally impacted, if at all, with what was currently being proposed. Would you say that's
Yeah, I think because we are regulating activities as opposed to the land use, and he felt like the state legislation was more focused on the preempting local zoning.
Yeah.
Which is part of the reason why this board this township decided to go with the police power or the general law ordinance, instead of a planning
Zoning.
avenue.
Yeah, exactly right. That's my
what-
recollection. Go ahead.
That's what John Ross said when he was here a couple months ago, too, is that ours was not subject to theirs due to the fact that it was a general law instead of a zoning.
Yep. Did you have other comments, too? Oh, I'm sorry. Did you have other comments, too? Go ahead, Sue.
I just wanted to respond, too, is if we open this back up to make the amendment, does that change anything? Right now, we have a general law ordinance that stands. If we open it back up to change it, I just want to make sure that.
No, yeah, that's a good question, because we always hear about grandfathering and that sort of thing, right? So that's another reason that we liked the general law option rather than a zoning, is because we don't create grandfathering with that. When we have a general law ordinance, it must be abided by. When we change it, it must be abided by. There's no layering of conformity to certain ordinances at the time.
In some of the research I've done, they've said that definitions should be very clear and say things like single-family, duplexes, condos, townhouses, co-ops, timeshares, guest houses, tiny houses, mother-in-laws, and that what is unsafe cannot be used for a short-term rental are garages, sheds, and anything that does not meet health standards. So I really think we need to be very, very clear on our definitions of what we're approving for, a short-term rental.
Glenn? Go ahead and use the mic there. Well, he's gonna buy one of you guys off and give him a desk next time.
Okay, under the purpose of the existing ordinance, that's what you were talking about.
Right.
When I read the purpose, it kind of contradicts where you ended up. I'm not sure how you would write that, but I sure would change the way it says it's gonna protect the integrity of those residential neighborhoods which were developed for single family. And you heard it tonight that
Right.
there is a real problem.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, I think there's some wordsmithing that needs to happen.
Have you got this written in such a way, kind of a draft?
I haven't drafted anything. I wanted to go through this work session with the Board and Planning Commission, and then come back to you all with draft language. Wanted to find out first if you even wanted to open this up for amendments.
There was absolutely no preconceived notions going into this. What we took was the comments that we heard through staff from the public, and the issue that we had at hand, we felt from those comments, and wanted to try to come up with a way to address those, but not in anything that was preconceived. Carl?
Yeah, I was just curious, what's been the nature of the enforcement actions to date? When somebody has repeated violations, is it just a slap on the wrist, or is it actually something that is, somewhat meaningful that might cause them to police their tenants?
It's typically been a phone call to them, Carl, or a letter in the mail.
Preston mentioned a violation potential or citation. What is that?
So that's just, it's a citation, just like what you would think of, almost like a parking ticket or something like that. We give out citations for blight ordinances, those types of things. And so it's very similar to that. But in order to do that, we have to have a very documented reason that it's in violation. And of course, this ordinance has a cumulative effect where they risk losing their license if it's happened in a repeated manner as outlined in the ordinance.
Nobody's lost their license today.
No.
And the citation doesn't involve any monetary restitution?
Oh, I think there is a fee. There is a fine,
I
yeah.
mean, if you're cited, do you have to pay a fine?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, all right, well, maybe that's what you were asking, I'm not really sure.
It goes through the municipal civil.
Okay, thank you.
Claire, do you think you have good feedback on that discussion, point 1?
Yes, yep, that's helpful. The next question that I had was kind of just wanted to take the temperature of both the board and planning commission on, do you think that this, looking for my notes, but basically, do you think this cap is do you want to move forward with the cap? If so, what would be an appropriate cap? So we could talk a little bit about generally what number we would cap that at. The legal counsel that we're working with recommends that it would be greater than the current number of licenses, but low enough to kind of achieve that desired outcome. So for example, a cap of 150 licenses, we currently have 126. They recommend, having a mechanism in place to evaluate whether or not you would want to increase the cap, but we wouldn't want to have that cap so high because it wouldn't be something, it would be much more difficult to decrease, to take licenses away. So you'd want to be conservative and kind of thinking through that number.
Glenn?
When you talk about caps, and I look at the map, the two places where all the density is the lakes and down in Pine Grove area. Capping it is not going to solve that problem. They're already there. Is there a way to create a cap by neighborhoods or whatever? That would, I would think, would eliminate the problem growing more and hopefully maybe help with the problem now.
Yeah, so we could take a look at having some density limitations, like short-term rentals can't be within a certain distance of one another. So we can't regulate them geographically because that, we can't regulate them by zoning district because that gets us to a zoning ordinance provision as opposed to police power. But we can look at some density limitations or distance requirements, for sure.
Can I just ask, or when we first started discussing this, weren't we thinking 300? We had 300 possible short-term rentals?
So what is included in that number is, again, 31.
Okay, thank you. I was making sure we had some clarification. So I guess what I keep looking at is the for-profit business that seems to be going on, where there are multiple entities, multiple homes being rented out by one entity. I don't know if it's a singular person or if it's a business. Maybe that needs to be looked at. And putting kind of a limit on how many can be owned by a business in East Bay Township.
Well, you know, I agree
don't
with
think
Sue, because
I don't think that would survive legally.
It
I don't think that would
does in
survive.
Las Vegas, because I sent you the memo that said they don't allow short-term rentals every 660 feet, one, and you cannot hold, an individual, a developer, or group cannot hold more than 5 licenses.
Renee?
Yeah, I was going to speak to the same thing in Palm Springs. I lived there for 6 years, and this was a very contentious subject, and I was the president of the association at the time, so I got to see it all firsthand. But their ordinance was they changed it a couple different times, but the final one was very restrictive in how many licenses you could only hold 2. And they went as far to say that if you had more than 2, you had X amount of years to get rid of one. So they really did take it to the extreme in some cases, but, and there was some kind of, it had something to do with corporations owning them as well. And I cannot remember exactly how that went down. But they did say how many you could own, how close they could be, and, I really do feel that they put a lot of thought into the ordinance to satisfy both, because I'm like you, Beth, I'm in the middle. I mean, obviously, what I do for a living in real estate, it's hard, because you want to satisfy the full bundle of rights if you own that home, what you should be able to do with it. But on the other half, you are entitled to quiet enjoyment. And so I think you're right on the right track. Enforcement is absolutely key. The enforcement has to be good, and it has to be, implemented so that these, people that are abusing the system, get their hand more than just slapped. But yeah, I think that the limit on how many they can own is important.
Excuse me, I just think when you start doing that, you're going to get into all sorts of games about, I own X, my wife owns Y, my brother owns Z, my child owns this. It seems that starts getting really messy, and I just rather say you have a cap. In fact, one example, I think the next town over, they have a percentage. I think they just came through with a percentage. And they're using 4% of the number of residences in the county. And that's what their cap number is. Now, that has the ability to, when you review it, whatever that period of time is, let's say annually, you then just see how many residences you have now at this time. You went from 4,000 to 4,100, and that gives you 4 more. So there is a certain elegance in that. But as far as capping the number that any one entity, whatever you describe that as, can own, I think you're going to get into all sorts of games.
My concern is the amount of money that VBRO, that Airbnb have, and they are buying things up. They are in Sedona, in Las Vegas, in Edinburgh, Scotland, in London. It's amazing. And this is going to hit us. It really is, because this is a destination people want to come. If you put a general cap on it, my whole street could become rentals. What happens to the neighborhood? I mean, we say we want to keep the integrity, but somebody could buy up every house.
And to speak to that, Paul, because I appreciate where you're coming from, you're right. We can't control if, every family member owns a house. But I think that where that cap on how many you can own, and I wish I could remember exactly how, they might have even limited corporations owning them, I can't remember. But to that effect, it would limit people coming in, these big corporations, and buying, dozens of these, homes. Because, we do have a housing issue here. Literally, Munson has had problems getting people employed because they can't find housing. So it would just kind of eliminate the big dog, so to speak, coming in and buying them, swooping them all up, where it at least would allow some of the housing to be available either for other people that want to do an STR or people that actually want to just live here and work here.
Yeah, but I was on the board of 48 sub-corporations. Yeah. And those in turn, traded up. Basically, each one was a sub-corporation, and the ownership would fall underneath. And again, 48. I was a busy guy.
It sounds to me like the only way you're going to control it is limit how close they can be together.
Yes.
Period. You can't tell somebody they can't buy something. You can limit the licenses, but I think you're better off to put a distance between them so you don't have a whole neighborhood or all the way around the lake having short-term rentals. I think that's the simplest way and the cleanest way.
So I think there may not, one of the things when I was just going to say I agreed with Sue's sentiment was there may not be a magic bullet and one solution. So one of the things that we can put to the attorneys, and I've really been impressed with their aptitude on this subject, is maybe how any solutions might be layered. So for one, I take your point to heart that, how does that work? But also I would, pose that to the attorneys who have dealt with this with a multitude of municipalities across the state, and see if they have any options regarding that before we just discount that as an option, and ask them if there's anything that makes that a possibility. But I also think, that it may be doing something like that with a distance, something like that.
I was going to say the same thing. Why can't you do all of it? I mean, it may not stop everyone from having every family member, but it would stop the corporations, it would stop, the commercial entities from possibly doing that, putting a cap on, 4 or 5 ownership, and the distance. I mean, like you said, layering that will at least help in that, because what we originally did this for is so people could stay in their homes or keep their family homes, not necessarily make it a township-wide business entity for everyone to make big bucks on,
I was going to echo that, because that was the true intent when we
Right.
passed it, was so that those descendants and generations could keep that property, not so that business could come in and swoop all of those up.
Right.
Yeah, I can remember a lot of the conversations that we had with, and I know each of you probably had them too, with like a handful of owners or heritage properties would call you and say, you're going to impact us by X, Y, and Z. What they were really after was trying to keep that home in their family.
And I think part of the benefit we have is that this has been in place for 2 years, so I would assume that most of those homes and individuals have secured licenses.
And if they haven't, then they should have.
Do we have a system in place well, first of all, you say we have 126 licensed, so let's say we adopt all of this and change the ordinance, are they going to have a time frame to where they have to, well, I guess they have to apply for their license every year, is that how that works?
Yeah, it's an annual renewal, and it's a rolling basis, so whenever they first got their license, that's when their renewal
Oh,
is.
okay. And do we have anything in place? I mean, I imagine there's some people out there still under the radar. Do we have anything for enforcement for that if it comes to the township's attention that there's people flying under the radar?
Yeah, and that's the benefit of host compliance. They're continually monitoring and providing us with updated lists, and so we're sending out letters to those individuals that are operating under the radar. So I think that we have a pretty good feel for.
It's also the benefit of doing a cap because, you know, people who will fly under the radar as long as they feel they can fly under the radar, but when they know there's 25 more licenses out there, and if they let 25 other people come into the light and actually get licensed, you know, there'll be some pressure to do that.
So these 32 inactive licenses, do we know what percentage of those either sold or they're not ever going to come back, or any information on them, I guess?
Yeah, we have followed up on some of those. I know that there was a property owner that had a few that decided, you know, not to renew. Some have sold to other owners.
And that's one of your questions about transferring the license.
Yeah, the recommendation,
jumping ahead, but-
yeah, and I thought this was a good recommendation, is, you know, you could allow transfer of a license if a person is operating a license at a property, they sell their property, that license, you know, the new property owner would obviously have to apply and pay for a license, but they could transfer it at that property. If they're moving across the township, then, you know, they would need to secure a license another way if they need.
But currently in our ordinance, it does not transfer on the sale of a house.
Right, they have to.
So I can't see where you would give the benefit of having a property that has a license, that becomes a material asset to that property. And as a parity between a non-licensed property versus a licensed property, there's obviously going to be an unfair premium if you allow that to transfer. So I would say at this particular point, you stick with what your ordinance says, and if we're at the cap, we're at the cap. But they have to be fully informing that individual who's buying their property that this house does not come with an automatic transfer. You know, it's like in New York when you had a medallion on a cab. You sold the medallion, and you know, the cab was worth a lot more because it had the medallion as opposed to a car that didn't.
Well, and the other thing would be is if we don't do the transfers, then we would potentially at some point be able to take care of the distance requirement.
Correct.
Because you wouldn't be able to go in and say, oh, well, you know, you two are next to each other, you're gone and you get to stay, you know.
Right.
It would have to be through normal attrition that that density, or that distance would come into play. Where if you transfer the license, then you may not, could possibly.
Yeah, I think that those are really good points. I think the one thing that the attorney brought up was just that, you know, there could be these homes that have existed as a short-term
Right.
rental for years and years and years, and if there's no licenses left, then that could be a challenge for them in selling their property.
Sue?
Thank you. I agree with what Paul says. I don't know that we're catering for businesses when we do the short-term rental. We were catering for those that wanted to keep their family homes. So if we try to put a distance on it, you're saying your family has value, yours doesn't. Or, well, you know what I'm saying. That, I don't believe that is where we want to go. I don't believe this license should transfer when the sale of the property, because then you're catering to a business. And you might have someone that is hanging on by every thread so that their descendants can get that short-term rental right next door, but you're going to allow it to transfer.
I was kind of thinking somewhere in the commentary too about, you know, allowing that license to transfer creates that value in that home as a rental rather than, as you said, as the generational home that it's supposed to be. That's, yeah.
I agree with everything we're talking about, But I just thought of the what if. What if the transfer is in the same family because someone passed away? So they're still keeping that family home in the family.
That shouldn't be a conveyance.
That's
though.
not a sale.
That's not a sale.
Okay.
But from assessing wise, yeah. Yeah. I would say if it's a legal conveyance, then that would qualify, but that wouldn't be a conveyance.
Okay, I just.
Yeah. No, it's a good point.
It goes one generation.
It's a good point.
It does, yeah, you're
It
right.
only goes one generation.
Yeah, it only goes before it becomes uncapped.
Do you think there's going to, well, maybe I shouldn't say that because then there will be many that are
But-
willing it to a,
Yeah, I mean, it could. I just, from my own personal, I'm like, well, I could very easily put it, I don't have short-term rentals, but very easily I could put a home to a grandchild or something. And so that wouldn't work to go along with the assessing side of it, kind of thing. It's not going to be perfect, no matter what we do.
true enough. Renee?
I just wanted to address what the attorney said about if it was a short-term rental for years and years. That's a tough one, because there's obviously value in a home that was, there's value to the person buying it because they're taking on a book of business. But when you're pricing a home, that doesn't really play a whole lot into the value of that home. I mean, the appraiser's not going to appraise it, and they're going to look at the rental, don't get me wrong, but that's a tough one. That house is going to be valued basically like its neighbor, like its comps. And then, and again, it's going to be an appealing factor, but and obviously it depends on the kind of market we're in, but I don't know that that's going to be a huge factor in the resale of it.
I would add to that conversation, kind of to the contrary, as evident with some of the people that spoke tonight, that you could look at it from the other standpoint, that adjacent property owners could have their property values negatively impacted by, activities that are going on at this short-term rental on the weekends. Maybe they're having a showing and there's a bachelorette party across the street. Potential buyers with a young family may go look at the next house. So there's the other side of it too. And one question, you said that I guess the attorney that kind of provided some review here recommended that the cap be higher than the current number of licenses. Is there a reason why we couldn't cap it lower and have those licenses drop off through attrition over time? Is there some kind of issue there?
We could do it lower. He kind of cautioned us just with some of the legal challenges. We'd have to have some sort of,
And I don't think I think we conveyed to him too, we didn't feel that would be palatable to the board. I know you weren't on the board when we went through the process, but having been through that, I didn't feel that would be a receptive idea. And we didn't discount it just for that reason, but also the legal difficulties in deciding how you get down to that number. So we said, you know what, we're gonna, at this point, people have, for whatever way they've come to it, they have arrived at having a short-term rental, and we weren't going to discern between those. That doesn't mean that we're not interested and understand people are impacted by those that are in existence, but we weren't looking to lower that cap rate and figure out a way on how we're going to get there.
Well, I guess I was only proposing that, if you did lower the number, and I'm sure there's legal precedence for this, but if you were to have the number lower than what the current license amount was, that, those would be grandfathered licenses that would fall out through sales or, potential violations and revocation of the license.
Question. Right now, we're basically wide open. To apply for a license for short-term rental does not necessarily mean I have to use it as a short-term rental, but I would have the license. So as we go through this process, is there some way that we can protect ourselves that we don't have a land office business with all of a sudden 500 applications coming in for short-term rentals? Can we can we suspend these at this point? Or is there something that, we can somehow protect ourselves? Otherwise, you have people saying, hey, look, I might as well get this now because somewhere in the future, I may want to do this, and all I have to do is keep paying the annual fee, and this thing keeps rolling forward. Which also adds value when I sell the house because I have my, so my question is, can we in some way protect ourselves that we don't all of a sudden have this land office business in short-term rentals?
Like a moratorium or something?
Yeah. I mean, it's just a question, because it seems like right now, we're now telegraphing, we're going to do this. So anybody who's out there thinking, I better do something, or some corporation, that has X number of houses they can buy up, or people can just come in and get a short-term rental license, and it doesn't mean you have to use it, it just means you have it.
That's an interesting question that we can pose to council, and if we feel like that'll be an issue, we can propose to the board the attorney's recommendation on how to mitigate for that. So whether that's a motion that would come before a board or something like that, we can absolutely pose that question.
Yeah, I think that's rather important.
Yeah, definitely. Glenn?
Yeah, I guess I'm kind of confused. When you issue a license for short-term rental, do you issue it to the homeowner or to the home?
To the property owner.
Okay, so when the property owner sells, that license
Is gone.
invalid.
Right, but right now there's no cap, so the future buyer
Well,
can, yeah.
When I was hearing some of this, sound like, well, when they sell the house, the license goes with the house, and
That would
it
be,
doesn't.
right, that would be
Okay.
one option, policy option,
Okay,
if there's
so
limited number,
If
but.
they sell
yeah.
and move, their license is invalid,
Right,
and it's open for anybody else.
right.
Okay, thank you.
Well, they don't have to move because they never lived there in the first place, but yeah. Okay, other questions we need to cover, Claire?
Let's see. So there was, let's see, there's a few, I guess, there was two, okay, I would say there's two last questions that I think would be helpful to get some feedback on. So one is revisions, and I think that what we would want to do is have something in the amended ordinance that the cap is reevaluated, maybe not even on a frequency, but, there's some triggering event or some opportunity to reevaluate the cap. So that's likely something that will be included in the draft ordinance. If anybody has any thoughts or recommendations about what that would,
I really like the percentage.
the 4% of.
Well, I don't know if that's the right
residences, yeah.
percentage, but a percentage.
What community was that?
Sutton's Bay, I think, wasn't
No,
Elmwood Township?
Elmwood.
Oh, yeah.
Elmwood.
One of the things that we could do, we can pull from assessing, is the number of PREs that we have every year, which gives us an idea of the quantity of homeowners that we have. And we could make it a function tied with that, because that's a definite number we can pull every single year. So if we were to, reach some percentage of that, it would trigger a reevaluation.
The only thing I would add is that you need to qualify what your numerator would be. In other words, are you talking about single home? You don't want to be adding in apartments and things like that. You want to define what your base number is.
Yeah, and apartments wouldn't have a PRE. Now, if you purchased a condo, that would have a PRE, so.
Yeah, but multifamily could be used as short-term.
Right.
So that-
Yeah, so you just need to qualify what you're going to be basing your number on.
That's one of the reasons I like that. It's because it's so easily discernible. They're calculating it anyway. They have to.
The only other thing that I think if we have that percentage, we also need that radius, because we have so many, I'll call them newer subdivisions or newer site condos that have the deed restriction that doesn't allow it, so it puts more pressure on those older areas and the lakes area that doesn't have that. So I think we need, again, it's the layering.
And the one thing that legislation may impact is that deed restriction, because not that it'll specifically talk about the deed restriction, but when it legally changes the name or the connotation of a short-term rental to a residential use, that has a lot of implications, and that's the deed restriction is, so,
Gotcha.
yep.
I think the other cap is the occupancy cap, because some places, some ordinances that I reviewed said a maximum of 16. That is it.
Right, and we have two per bedroom.
Plus 4.
Plus 4,
So
correct.
if you have a 6-bedroom or a 5-bedroom house, you really could have a party. So, I mean, are we really going to go by bedrooms? Are we going to go by, as many as you want, or are we going to cap it? I mean,
I guess my only thoughts on that, Judy, are that you almost have to, because obviously the price of this home might not be the same prices, and you're going to warrant, I mean, to pay for this, 6-bedroom home versus a 3-bedroom home, there's going to be quite a difference in the rental prices. So to cap the number of people is going to cap their income ability, and that's probably not going to fly either.
but if it's a family cottage and the intent, I don't know how many family cottages were 6 bedrooms. Not very many.
Tracy,
Go ahead.
did you have a comment? I was only going to say that when you're looking at a 5-bedroom house versus a 1-bedroom, 1-bath cottage, I mean, you really can't expect the capacity to be the same. So there almost has to be some mechanism of the structure itself, some recognition of that. Now, what I will say is, one of the things that has been new to me recently is hearing that these, not that I'm not surprised it happens, that's not what I'm saying, but that we have had people living next door to it feeling the impacts because they've had the overcapacity at those houses. That's one complaint that I haven't heard, and I haven't heard that planning and zoning has heard specifically. So, but I think the way we deal with that is really through enforcement, so that when we see, when someone says, there were 10 cars there, and it's a 1-bedroom, 1-bath, well, we get that. If they have documented and we document properly, then we can take an action on that.
So is our cap with 2 persons per bedroom plus 4 others, is that, I mean, I'm just asking, is that realistic? Do we think that's fair?
On this part, I can only speak personally. We haven't rented in this area, but when we go to Maryland, which is central for all of my family all over, that seems reasonable to me, because you always have, like it's an aunt and an uncle in 1 bedroom, but then you always have this overflow of kids who are in bunk beds or, sleep out couches or whatever. So it seems reasonable without completely packing in there. Again, that's just my personal experience.
And we've done that before when we rented too.
So I think when there's those type of violations of the overcapacity, there should be an escalating scale with the violation and the fee. There are some things that you have a hand slap. There are some things that take you all the way up to another level. And something like that is blatantly over what the intent was and what they got the license for.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. We could take a look at that and see if we can think of any mechanisms to do that. I do think that it could be difficult, only because then you're looking at, okay, we documented there's 10 cars there, and they said 8 of them were people just stopping by. And then we're left with license plates and running plates, and gets to be a tough one. But I think in general, we can take those ones where they're, you know, resident, or pretty reasonably a stretch, that you're going to have 12 cars at a one-bedroom. Judy, did you have something else?
Nope, I mean, not on that, just, you know, on, well, the only thing is, insurance, we don't require any that they have any proof of liability insurance.
Correct. I mean, I haven't reviewed that part of the ordinance in a while, but if you're reading that, then that would be
Yeah,
correct.
Yeah. And then, that might be something for us to think about, I don't know, because we issued the license, and are we saying that this is a safe dwelling? And if something happens, could they, I mean, you might know that.
I don't know the legal side of things when it comes to that, but I do know, well, I know that they do, like in Palm Springs, they required an inspection of the home. It had to be professionally inspected. They had to make sure they had the proper amount of smoke alarms, the carbon monoxide detectors, all those things. And I know in Long Lake, don't they require something to do with the septic? And
For all sales.
And for here.
I know, but there's something on they require something for short-term rentals. I just can't remember what it is.
They templated theirs off of ours. We share the same legal counsel, and they were just right in the same lockstep. They were about 6 months, I think, after us, or, you know, we kind of flip-flopped here and there. Go ahead.
No, I've just seen other ordinances that from the cities I was referring to do require a proof of liability insurance. The other thing that they did say is they also make them file a tax form so that we know that they are paying the sales tax. We don't have any idea if short-term rentals are paying any sales tax. Is that right, Trace?
We don't do anything with sales
It
tax
says
here.
the person who rents short-term rental shall pay an applicable sales tax and required by the use of tax, Michigan's tax. In some ordinances, they make them fill out a form that is submitted to the state so that they know that they are paying that 6% tax. But, you know, that's just, I mean, that's what our thing says. You have to pay taxes, so we don't know if they really are, right?
One of the things I just wanted to mention, I can't remember if it was you or Renee mentioned about the inspections, and I think a lot of our board members will remember, we did not choose to do an inspection that is done by the township only because of capacity. What we did was we put that onus on the homeowner where they submit an affidavit that says that they have, and we list the requirements that they must have, which are the smoke detectors and the carbon monoxide and so forth. If there is an issue at that home, we have it, they said they had sufficient, that is completely on their backs.
I think that's perfectly acceptable. I mean, it wasn't the township or the city's responsibility to have it inspected, it was theirs. But they did have to provide proof of that, you know, it had been done and it was up to code or.
Sure.
You know, so, yeah.
Carl, did you have something? Oh, okay. Claire, where?
Yeah, so I think this was really good feedback, thank you. The last thing that so in working with this attorney, we're planning to modify the language just to clarify that the resort condominiums along US 31 that function very much like hotels are exempt, but we'll work with them on that language. I guess the last thing I wanted guidance on from you all tonight was just the cabin courts. They're exempt right now. And we've had, you know, some public comment at Planning Commission with desire to have cabin courts regulated as a short-term rental, but was just kind of interested in your in thoughts and direction on that.
How does that differ? I mean, aren't they kind of mini resorts?
Mm-hmm.
So how would that differ from the resorts that we're referring to that are exempt?
It would be very similar to that, so that could be a compelling reason to exempt them, but they're in a much more residential setting than those resorts.
Right, but that seems like a tough one to differentiate to me, especially when they've been acting as a resort.
Do we know if, like, what we're talking about, condominiums and the other resorts, are they primarily under water and sewer, as opposed to septic and well? Do we know that?
Yeah, the cabin courts are all.
No, they're all
well and
septic and well, but I'm talking about the ones that,
Regional Business District, they're all on water.
yeah, so that's an issue. That's where they could come under short-term
Potentially
rentals.
tie something to that.
Yeah.
I guess,
And the infrastructure is very different in the lakes area. I mean, there's one-lane roads.
Right.
And there's two tracks. 31 isn't a one-lane road or a two-track. So we're dealing with infrastructure issues that we're not dealing with those other ones.
I guess, Claire, just as 1/7 of the board, my personal opinion is I would not have a problem with having the cabin courts adhere to the short-term rental ordinance, saving the fact that it doesn't put us in a legal precarious position in the opinion of the attorney. If there is a safe, predictable way to do that, I personally would be okay with that. I think, Carol Kusel had provided us this map, and I think that gives us, a lot of, I mean, it's not new information to us, but it just kind of puts it in perspective as to, these are operating very, very similar to STRs, so. Glenn?
Yeah, when you talk about cabin courts, they don't rent monthly. They're just like a hotel, aren't they, where people come up for the weekend?
Yeah.
So you're talking about limiting the number of times they can rent it?
Yep, so they would only be able to rent every 4 days, as is dictated by our short-term
Well, I
rental
don't-
ordinance.
Yeah, that might
I
be,
don't think I would be in favor of that.
yeah, that might be an
Only
issue.
1/7. That's what their livelihood is. It's just like a hotel or a motel.
Although, Glenn, don't they traditionally, I mean, maybe you guys know better, I don't know that I would know, but I would think that those were traditionally the weekly rentals, where people come up and rent them on a week
That's
basis.
still short term.
Well, no, but it meets our 4-night minimum on the rental ordinance.
Okay, I thought it was,
So I guess the question, they'd stay short-term, but if they were subject to the short-term rental licensing requirements, then they can't rent every night. They could turn over once every 4 nights, but could still rent short-term.
Spider Lake Retreat, that has this, they have 16 bedrooms with 2 queen-size beds and 2 kitchens. In the summer, you have to, I think it's like June through August something, you have by the week, and then they go to weekend rental. I mean, just as a FYI, that's.
And that
yeah.
4-night
Right.
really did the weekend. I remember when we were
Yeah,
going through that long
yeah.
process.
I think the other thing is, we're no longer a one-season visit place like we used to be 50 years ago. People would come up for the summer, but we now have a lot of fall activities going on. We really have a lot of winter sports that we market, and it's great. And then we have, the spring fishing and kind of really interesting stuff for people too. So, we're a 4-season area, and whereas things used to rest in
And
the
it's 80
winter.
degrees at the end of
Yeah.
October, so.
So they're out there water skiing.
Good, Sue, go ahead.
I'll just interject. I think we've always been a 4-season location. My folks came up here 53 years ago to go skiing in the winter.
Yeah.
And that's where we came to Traverse City. Yeah, I wasn't born and raised here. I will always be a Fudgy, although I've helped create some born-bys here. But we've always been 4-season. Maybe some folks haven't seen us that way, but we certainly have been.
But even more so now because of the wine industry, and the fall harvests and all the stuff. I think it's even bigger than just the.
Everything's bigger in general.
Yeah, it is, Sue, it is.
Claire, do you have any remaining questions, or I mean, I think we have a good basis and feedback to work with the attorney.
I think this is good guidance. I think my last question would just be, and this is more of kind of my assumption, is I think that we would come back and reconvene this joint session, both the board and the planning commission, to review some language, some proposed language.
You got a time frame there, you know.
It would probably be after.
Okay, very good. Go ahead.
I would just ask that we figure out Paul's point
Yeah,
to
we will.
the
We will.
number.
Yeah, we will look into, yep.
Because if that's I'm sorry, if that's the case, we'll bring that back in really short order.
Right.
Yep, the possible moratorium, absolutely. And we will follow up with the attorney within the week and go through all of this and be able to come back to you all with.
Sure.
One quick question. I know we didn't talk about this as a recommended change, but under the current ordinance, under the application information required, just for clarification for me, item number 1 says the name, address, and telephone numbers and email address of the owner of the proposed short-term rental. We don't really identify, the name could be Up North LLC, right? It doesn't have to be an individual person.
Yep. But the local agent would need to be.
Could we somehow compel the owner to provide an actual physical residential home address of the person that owns that property?
There may not be one.
Right.
And we can
Of
take-
the owner of the entity that owns it. There's got to be somebody listed on a,
An LLC can be multiple owners.
Right.
Multiple members.
but I guess could we require that and I guess I'm getting to a point here, just thinking out loud. If we required that that short-term rental application had a principal residence exemption address associated with an owner tied to that application.
Again, each of those, you could have 5 or 10 of them. So tell me.
But
tell me
somebody
what-
would. I guess my
Yeah.
point is, if there's a property, let's say on Spider Lake or Pine Grove or any other neighborhood that's potentially contentious and causes trouble and people are aggravated and they don't like it, it's pretty easy to live, downstate or in another state and own an LLC and hide behind that and not have to sort of endure some of the issues associated with it. Yes, you can have a property manager that you pay a fee to answer the phone to deal with the issues, but maybe it's puts a little more responsibility on a physical person that owns it and has the investment in place that doesn't have to deal with it to have, have their information be public.
We'll take a look at the current applications and the requirement, people are allowed to have authorized agents. They have to fill out paperwork to do that. So they would have to be on the paperwork plus their agent. So we'll take a look at those applications and see if there's any tweaking that needs to be met to kind of get to the purpose of the point of the comments, what you're trying to reach at.
Yeah, and I don't know that there's really an end goal other than just kind of exposing, maybe providing some transparency into who this investor is, who is this person, and having a physical person attached to it.
Okay.
Maybe that's in the Matt Cook world and we can't get there, but it would
Yeah.
be nice.
Never find them. Never find them.
He knows, he's been on 48 companies. You can't find Paul, he's in.
We can find all 48 of them on Google, Paul.
Just to clarify, it was an insurance subsidiary in each one of the states, and that's all I did was sign.
Okay, good? Okay, perfect. Thank you, again, thank you very much for your work. I also want to extend appreciation to Chris Patterson. It's been a pleasure working with him on this topic. And with that, we'll move to public comment, and if there is any member of the public who would like to come and speak to the board, please feel free to. Just let us know your name and address and your comment to the board. Thank you, Claire. Okay, I think we've tired everybody out, I think. But thank you for staying with us, and this was all, I want to, thank Claire, thank the attorney, thank you guys. This was a really good discussion. I appreciate having engaged board members and Planning Commission and Township Board that we can go over these issues with. So with that, you have an upcoming regular meeting, November 9th? All right, everyone will be there or be square. And unless there are any objections, I guess both the Planning Commission and the board stand adjourned? No objections. Everybody have a nice evening, drive safely home, and thank you very much.